once I got situated and, I got my feet underneath me again, I while I was still in high school, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right. And believe it or not, police officer. I've had all these run-ins with police, and, I've always respected the police, right? Especially the good ones that cared, right? And, you run into those that have attitudes and what have you, and rightfully so, because listen, we weren't being super nice ourselves.
Gonna say, it's not like you weren't throwing attitude also.
Yeah, exactly. But you run into the good ones, right? And the really good ones. And so I've always had that respect for them. So I said, I want to be a police officer. I hadn't done anything that would prevent me from being a police officer, right?
Other than your contacts with law enforcement at that time, did you have anybody in your family or friends who were law enforcement officers?
No. I was the first. So when I made the decision, I want to be a police officer, how am I going to get it? How am I going to do that? So I went to the local police department that later on I ended up getting hired with, and I asked if I could volunteer there, right? There was a program in the school where federal funds can be used to pay teenagers to go work for nonprofits, municipalities and stuff like that. So I figured that's a great way. It's not going to cost the police department any money, and I can volunteer and get my foot in the door, get people to know me, right? Well, the problem is they knew me. And so they said,
we don't need to get to know you.
Yeah,
we already know you
exactly.
really well.
They're like, no. We don't want you in here. No, blah. All right. So, which really, it hurt, right? Because again, I felt like somebody is determining my destination, right? So then I thought, well, what's the next best way to get my foot in the door? So I went to the city court and I asked if I could volunteer there. And I met with the local judge, David Ferris, and he sat down with me and he asked me what my story was. And I told him I was flat out honest. Basically what I'm telling you now, I was that honest with him. And he goes, okay, well, I'll let you volunteer here. But if I ever hear of you having any contact with the police, you're done. Your friends aren't coming here to hang out. This is not a place for you to do X, Y, Z. No. If you want to learn, we'll teach you stuff here. And he really laid the smack down on me, right? Which is what I needed. I'd never had that.
Welcome to the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantiani. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. So let's get into this. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Arizona. I grew up in the East Valley, primarily Gilbert, Mesa, and Chandler, and Tempe.
Growing up, well, take a step backwards. Do you come from a big family, a small family?
No, it's a fairly small family.
Brothers, sisters?
I've got 3 younger brothers.
And were you kind of the leader of the pack? I mean, they kind of follow behind you pretty much?
Yeah. I was the oldest, so I naturally, am the nurturer. So I took care of my younger brothers.
And growing up, what took up your daily life? Were you heavy into sports? Were you an academic type guy?
Well, not really. So my teenage years were kind of, I got into a lot of trouble as a teenager. And, I was associated with a gang, and I ran with a group of kids. I grew up very, very poor, right? We didn't have a lot of money. And, I don't ever remember a time where we had, enough money to pay for the electricity, the water bill, rent, and food. We were always without one of those. That's kind of how I was. And there were many, many nights where me and my brothers went to bed without eating. So as I got older, you become a teenager. You get into junior high, and I couldn't afford the clothes that all the kids were wearing, right? And so bullying started to happen in junior high, and I noticed that the kids
were being bullied.
Yeah, because I didn't have the Jordans that the kids were wearing, and I just wore hand-me-downs and secondhand stuff, and So I experienced that in junior high, and I was in 7th grade. And the 8th graders, they were kids that were from my neighborhood, right? And so we had the same demographics. We didn't have a lot of money. And so I kind of gravitated towards them because we were from the same neighborhood. They were just a year older. So I started hanging out with these guys, and, they were getting into trouble. But I noticed when I hung out with these guys that I wouldn't get bullied anymore, right? Because these are some tough kids, and nobody wants to have issues with them, right? So that's what kind of got me started down that road. I'm the youngest kid. I'm the youngest of the group. And so I'm kind of just watching these older kids, and I kind of wanted to be like them because nobody messed with them. And then we got into high school, and it kind of carried on into high school. Yeah.
Prior to your junior high school time, were you consciously aware of the street gangs? I mean, were they prominent in and around right where you lived, or was it more you were exposed to them at school?
No, it was more at school, and I didn't know anything about gangs in elementary school. Going into junior highs when I was really introduced to that world. But in hanging out with these kids, you start getting this. Here's the thing: when it comes to this group of kids that I was hanging out with, is we built this camaraderie because we came from the same demographic. So anytime any one of us had any food or money, we shared it amongst each other. And as a matter of fact, we had a little saying, he who eats alone dies alone, right? And if you think about that, you find a group of kids like this, you want to hang out with them, right? You create this bond. And that saying, he who eats alone dies alone, I still use that to this day. Even in my law enforcement career, when we had training days and we were out wherever, you're told bring your lunch because you're not going to be able to drive anywhere. Anybody who didn't bring lunch that day, I would never eat by myself. I would always share with them. And that's just how it's always been with me my entire life. So I had that camaraderie with these kids. Well, as we got older, the trouble started becoming more and more serious, and my freshman year in high school, very first day, I got into a little back and forth issue with a gang member, and never met this kid before in my life, but he was from California. He was a Crip, and he was wearing all this purple. Grape Street is where he was from, and I just happened to be wearing a red shirt that day. I wasn't into like Bloods and Crips, because we're Hispanic group of kids, but because I was wearing this red shirt, he intentionally stepped up to me and started throwing gang signs at me. Basically, he started trouble with me. And when he did that, the other Crips who were from a different Crip gang, they're from Arizona, but they're all together. They came over. Essentially, we're standing behind him like they're with him, and it's just me, right? And this is my first day in high school. And so then, the group of kids that I knew, I told the guy who stepped up to me first, I said, let's all go to the bathroom. We'll take care of this in the bathroom, all of us. And let me go get my boys. And I started throwing out names. And then the Crips who were from here, who were local, they knew who I was talking about. They're like, oh, no, we're not involved in this, is what they said immediately. Well, the guy that started with me, he was from California. He didn't know anybody here, right? And all of a sudden, I noticed even just throwing names out of these guys instilled fear in this other group, right? And so it just slowly, it progressed, and, it became almost commonplace. And I hate to say this and I hate to admit it, but it became commonplace on our weekends, to have run-ins with police. And there were many a night where I ended up in the backseat of a patrol car and having my mom having to come pick me up in the middle of the night from the police because we got in some kind of trouble. And so that's how I grew up, my teenage years. It wasn't playing sports and the typical thing. And because I got in that much trouble, when it came time for me to apply to be a police officer. Let me back up. I had to disconnect from this group at some point.
Well, and I've got a couple questions that I would like to ask. First off, were you guys identifying yourself as a gang, or were you actually just working together for camaraderie's sake?
Well, initially we were working together for camaraderie's sake. And then the older kids that were older than the kids I was hanging out with, they were the 17-year-olds. They were like, well, you guys are all, Hispanic. You guys need to, create your own Hispanic gang. Well, we're kids, I'm 13 years old. What do I know? Right. And these other kids are 14, 15. And in high school, I'm, now 15, 16 years old, so we kind of created our own name, and I won't say the name.
Right, of course.
But so we kind of associated ourselves as, yes, we're a gang, and we did. We had many run-ins with the local PD. But at some point, and I noticed some of us, not me, but my friends were getting locked up, and I noticed that when somebody gets locked up, nobody visits them, right? My cousin got locked up. I visited him, right?
Those who eat alone die alone, especially when they're in jail.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so then the realization kind of hit me, like, can I stand alone? I can't stand alone. I need these guys. And I've been doing this for years, throwing out their names just to instill intimidation,
And this may even sound like a rhetorical question, but at what point, or was there a point that your parents were kind of like, hey, you need to knock this crap off. You need to, kind of straighten your act up.
Oh yeah.
Or I'm not trying to throw your parents under the bus. Were they kind of oblivious to what you were doing?
No. You can't be oblivious when you're getting a call from the police at, 1:00 in the morning because your kid is out causing trouble. Right. My mom, yelled at me, typical mom stuff,
Right.
But I mean, realistically, what is she going to do when I'm 15 years old? You know what I mean? And I grew up with a single mom, for most of the time. So really, I mean, she's got 4 kids. She's got to take care of my other younger brothers. Now, the interesting thing about that was I never allowed my younger brothers to hang out with us. Like I knew enough that I was doing stupid stuff, and I don't want it to involve them, right? If that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense.
But yeah, that was kind of my teenage years.
Did you, looking back on it, did you have your own moral compass, so to speak, that kind of kept you were getting jammed up. You were ending up in the backseat of a police car, but obviously nothing that rose to the level where you actually ended up in jail. Was that because you were making the conscious efforts to not cross that line, or just happenstance it never happened?
No, I made that conscious decision. I knew that if you go beyond a certain point, there's no return from that. You're going to go to prison, right? So I was smart enough at least to know that. So I guess you could say I utilized the camaraderie from this group, but I didn't allow it to overtake me. Like many of them, I think every single one of them ended up in prison at some point, and some of them are still in prison to this day. I don't associate with them. I haven't talked to them since then, but they never changed their ways.
While you were hanging out with them, and while you were, I'm assuming you considered yourself a gang member, but were you staying on top of your academics? Were you staying on top of school, or was?
No. My freshman year, I'd go to class with no pencil, no backpack with paper or books or anything. I would just show up in class and ask somebody, hey, can I borrow some paper? Can I borrow a pencil? Right? How irresponsible is that? But that was my routine. To me, academics wasn't at the forefront at that point.
For you looking back then, did you have plans for adulthood as a 15, 16-year-old?
To be honest with you, I
just not end up in jail.
Well, I did think I would end up. So here's the thing. I figured 19, 20 years old was old age, right? Because I'm 14, 15 around this time. I didn't think I would live to be 19, right? And if I did live to be 19, I figured I'd be in prison, right? That was my 2 options. Somehow that's what and that's truly how I thought. And I thought, if I end up becoming 19, turning 19, 20, I'm going to be an old man, right? And I just, for some reason, that was in my head. That was in my mindset.
You were going to start talking about pulling back from it, and I cut you off. Did you make the conscious effort to step back from the gang while you were in high school?
Well, yes and no. So my sophomore year in high school, I I was getting into quite a bit of trouble. You know, I went to a different high school, a different city, and
were you forced to go to another school, or your parents moved?
My family moved out of the town that I was living in, and so I moved in with my aunt and uncle in a very gang infested area, far different than where I came from, where I moved from, right? And I mean, these were some hardcore gang members.
So out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, my first day at the other high school, my sophomore year, again, I'm getting into a confrontation, you know, with gang members, right? But I noticed this time, I don't have backup. I don't have anybody with me. And one of the gangs from that city saw me scoring up with some gang members by myself, and I don't know, they just thought that I would be a good fit for their group, and they wanted to bring me in with them. Well, I didn't want to. I don't know, I just didn't feel the need that I had to do that. But I was getting into trouble living with my aunt. One day I came home and I was like ditching school, not going to school. And I came home and all of my clothes and property was just thrown on the front lawn of the house, and the door was locked. And so
tough love 101.
Yeah. I knocked on the door. My uncle answered the door, and my aunt said, "You can't live here anymore. You need to leave." Right. And so I asked for a couple of garbage bags to put my stuff in, and I loaded my stuff up and I walked away. And I was homeless for about 6 months as a teenager.
Just bouncing from friends to friends, or
on good days, sometimes they'd let me sneak in the house overnight to sleep. If a friend had a car, you know, they'd let me sleep in the trunk of the car because it was wintertime here in Arizona and it does get cold at night. So I'd sleep in the trunk of a car, or I'd hang out at a park in downtown Mesa all day. And I did that for about 6 months.
What was the turning point that got you off the streets?
So, you know, it was interesting because a friend of mine had an uncle who had a portable like pressure washer, and he would go to West Phoenix to the truck stops to wash semi trucks, right? And they'd pay him like $50 per truck. Well, he needed a helper, so he he came over to me and asked if I'd help. I said, sure, you know, it's extra money. He would pay me $5 for every semi truck I washed. But it gave me enough money to get a room, you know, for a night or two. Which was really nice because, you know, I had a shower and a bed. But, you know, at some point, you know, in the 80s, there used to be this commercial that said, when I grow up, it was like a public service announcement. When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. When I grow up, I want to be a doctor. When I grow up, I never said I wanted to be a drug addict, right? I don't know if you remember those commercials, but that commercial kept running in my head. And I said, you know, when I grow up, I never said I wanted to be homeless, right? And so I kind of, on this particular day, I didn't go work at the truck wash. I stayed home and I was watching this show, Geraldo Rivera. I don't know if you remember that show. And on that show, he had a panel of kids that were teenagers some of them were gang members, some of them, you know, and they talked about the stuff that they did, right? And really young kids too, you know, like a 12-year-old, I think, or a 13-year-old. And Geraldo asked there was like a child psychologist there, and he asked, hey, doctor, based on what these kids have said, do they have a future? And without even thinking twice, the expert said, no, they don't. It's too late for them, right? And it felt like he was talking to me, right? Because I'm like, wait, what? I'm older than some of these kids, you know, and that really got to me, right? I felt like somebody was determining my destiny for me. And so at that point I said, no, I'm not doing this anymore, right? I need to focus. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting a steady job. I think it was like Kmart, right? And I liked working there because they paid you every week, right? So I knew I was going to get something in that week. And then I found a roommate in Tempe, not too far from here, in not such a great neighborhood, but the utilities, everything was included. So I was, you know, how old was I 16, 17, right around there.
And have you completely dropped out of school?
Yeah. I had dropped out of school completely when I was kicked out of the house. And so it was like my sophomore year, that beginning of second semester. So the rest of the year of that year, I dropped out of school, and mainly because I was homeless and,
Right.
And then once I got someplace to live, stable, if you want to call it that, and employment, then I said, okay, I need to go back to school. So there was a school in the East Valley where if you get kicked out of regular school, in lieu of going to jail and getting locked up, the court will say, go to this school, right? So all the bad kids from all over the valley were all centralized in this one location, right? And I'm talking gang members from all over were in this school. So I was able to get myself signed up.
But not court ordered. You just went in on your own.
Yeah, I went in on my own. Yeah. That was a turning point for me because it was at that point where I'm like, I've got to take responsibility for me. I my friends who, I used to hang out with, they're not going to do anything for me because they can't even do anything for themselves at this point, So I had to grow up, and I had to grow up fast. So
were you able to keep your younger brothers and stuff away from the gangs through the whole time, even when you were on the streets?
Well, they lived in Tucson, and yeah, I made it a point for them not to, because the neighborhood they moved into over there, again, was just gang infested, and I had to talk to my younger brothers and let them know, basically the decisions you make, at spur of the moment could put you in prison for a very long time, and is it going to be worth it? But at the same time, don't let people push you around either.
Right.
Because if you let people push you around, they're going to do it constantly. They're not going to go away. So sometimes you just got to punch somebody in the face for them to go away, kind of a thing. But they were able to stay out of the gang life. And
were you able to ultimately graduate from high school on time?
Yeah, I did, because it was like an accelerated high school. That's what it allows. That's the benefit of that. It allowed you to still be able to graduate when you were supposed to. But that was a rough school. I mean, that every hour they would break. Everybody would take a break. They go outside, and it was a smoke break. So it didn't matter how old you were, you could smoke. Even the teachers were smoking with the students out there.
Cigarettes off a student.
Yeah, exactly. And it was an interesting experience, that school alone. But it was funny because, I would say about 99% of the kids at that school smoked cigarettes. I was the only one who didn't smoke. I would just sit there, kind of just observe people, kind of just hang out. And it's like, I don't know, even then I knew I'm not the same as these people here. I'm a little different.
So by that point in time, you'd already in yourself said, I'm no longer a gang member and I'm not going to associate. So you didn't regroup up with any other gang while you're at this school?
No, I didn't. Nope. It was just me by myself. And, there were some gang members or some gangs that had like 5-6 people from the same gang rolling through the school, and they were intimidating other people, and I had a run-in with one of them. For whatever reason, they decided they were going to focus on me. And so the campus that we were located at was like an Air Force base at one time. And at that time, it was still part of the Air Force base. So you couldn't drive on the campus. You had to get bused to that school, which was a benefit to me because I lived in Tempe. I didn't have a car, right? So how am I going to get in? And the school was located way in like west of or east of Gilbert in Mesa. It was pretty far away. So it just so happened the kids that rode on my bus, because I lived in Tempe, they rode my bus. And it was funny because they were going to get into a fight with this group from another city. And I knew some of those guys from that other city, that group, but I didn't associate. I wasn't one of them. Well, one day the two groups were squaring off on the campus, and security came and broke it all up. Well, I'm a kid. I'm like, what's going on? So I asked one of the kids who was one of my friends, hey, what's going on? Oh yeah, we're going to fight with these guys, blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, that other group from Tempe saw me talking with them. So automatically they associated me with them. Well, the moment I got on the bus, well, as I was walking to the bus, one of those guys from Tempe squared off with me, right? And he wasn't the main guy who was in charge of that group. He was like the second in command, if you will. And so he and I, we squared off, and I didn't back off, even though he had all of his friends with him. I was scared, you know, like I'm outnumbered. And so we had squared off, we exchanged words, and then one of his friends said, "Oh, we'll get him, you know, at his bus stop," right? And so they all went on the bus, and I'm like, "Oh man!" And one of the other guys was like, "Hey, you want us to give you a ride home?" I'm like, "No,
I got to deal with this eventually."
Yeah, and if I take a ride home, how does that look? It makes me look weak, right? So anyway, they get on the bus, you know, the kids that I have an issue with, right? And they sit like in the center area of the bus. And so I walked in. I'm like, yeah, I better not walk back there. So I sat at the very front, right? Now,
hey, Mr. Bus Driver.
Yeah, hey there, buddy. I've never talked to you all year, but let's be friends, right? And other gang members from other gangs were coming on. They saw everything that happened, and you know how they are. They're going to instigate stuff, right? And I remember this guy goes, "Hey, let's go sit in the back," right? I never even talked to this guy before ever, and he's because he wants to see a fight, right? Yeah. He wants to see somebody get their butts beat, right? So or their butt beat, and so I can't say no, because if I say no, I look weak. So I'm like, okay. Right. So I get up and I start walking towards, and they're all just like ready to pounce. Right. And I'm just walking by, and the main guy, right. He's just mad dogging me as I'm walking by, and he said something. I couldn't understand what he said. And I go, "What'd you say?" I go, "What'd you say?" And then I kept walking, right. Because I was expecting I'm going to get jumped at some point. And so I walked and I sat at the back of the bus, and I had like maybe one seat behind me, and then that's it, right? So on the bus ride, you know, all these stops that we go to before my bus stop, nobody was getting off at their bus stops, right? Because all these kids, they want to see a fight. They think, oh, something bad's going to happen, right? You know, they're never going to see me again because I'm going to get killed, right? So nobody, and the bus driver, he was hilarious. He's like, "What?" He's like, "Why is nobody getting off of your bus? Like, what's going on here?" Right? And we're about 2 bus stops away from my bus stop, and I am just, I'm terrified, like internally, like I am scared, right? But you just cannot ever show that. And there was a kid sitting on the other aisle opposite of me, and I forget what gang he's from. He's smoking weed, and he's like, "Hey, you want to hit? You want some weed? Because they're going to jump you, you know." I'm like, no, I'm good. Because I never smoked. I never did drugs or any of that. I go, no, I'm good. And I look up, and the kid that initially shoulder checked me, that started the whole thing, he's smoking weed up there, right? And so I'm like, must be nervous, right? And then he gets up, and now he's walking back towards me, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, it's going to go down right now, you know? And he sits down. The kid that was sitting on the opposite aisle, he asked the kid, you know, move. Kid moved. He sat down, and he goes, "You still want to box?" That's what he asked me. "You still want to box?" And right there, I knew he's scared.
He didn't really want to.
Yeah, he didn't want to. He's scared, right? And I didn't want to box, right? I'm like, "Yeah, I want to box." I'm like, "You disrespected me." And he's like, "Oh, no, man. You know, we're both down for hours. We're not going to ever back down. You know, I don't really know you to box you," is what he said, right? And I knew right there at that point, this kid does not want any of this. Thank God, because who knows what would have happened. And so I looked at him. I go, "Well, don't ever disrespect me again." And he goes, "Cool. We good?" I go, "Yeah, we're good." And we shook hands, right? And then he went behind me and he peed in the back seat. I'm like, holy crap, how scared is this kid, right? You know, like, what's going on here? So I got off the bus, nothing happened. And then the very next day, I get on the bus. They're on the bus. And there was this little kid. Again, there's instigators, right? I'm just, you know, it's early in the morning. I always would just like nap on the bus on the way to school. With a little instigator kid, they always used to make fun of him, right? because he had chubby cheeks and what have you. And they were making fun of him that morning. And he goes, he said something to the effect of, "Shut up, or I'm going to get my boy over here to punk you guys again." Right. And he's pointing at me. And I'm like, oh my God, stop. Like, don't, because now they're going to view it as I disrespected all of them. And now they're going to have to do something to me. Right. And I'm just like, kid, shut up. Don't do anything. Fortunately, nothing ever came about it. They left me alone. People left me alone because they didn't know anything about me. And I made that a point. The less you know about me, it kind of keeps people at bay.
None of the guys from your old gang ended up at that same school during the time you were there?
No. A lot of them ended up getting locked up. So, no, not one of them.
So what year did you graduate?
95.
And at that point in time, you're 18 years old. You've now got a high school diploma. What were you thinking was going to be your future?
So, once I got situated and, I got my feet underneath me again, I while I was still in high school, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right. And believe it or not, police officer. I've had all these run-ins with police, and, I've always respected the police, right? Especially the good ones that cared, right? And, you run into those that have attitudes and what have you, and rightfully so, because listen, we weren't being super nice ourselves.
I was going to say, it's not like you weren't throwing attitude also.
Yeah, exactly. But you run into the good ones, right? And the really good ones. And so I've always had that respect for them. So I said, I want to be a police officer. I hadn't done anything that would prevent me from being a police officer, right?
Other than your contacts with law enforcement at that time, did you have anybody in your family or friends who were law enforcement officers?
No. I was the first. So when I made the decision, I want to be a police officer, how am I going to get it? How am I going to do that? So I went to the local police department that later on I ended up getting hired with, and I asked if I could volunteer there, right? There was a program in the school where federal funds can be used to pay teenagers to go work for nonprofits, municipalities and stuff like that. So I figured that's a great way. It's not going to cost the police department any money, and I can volunteer and get my foot in the door, get people to know me, right? Well, the problem is they knew me. And so they said,
we don't need to get to know you.
Yeah,
we already know you
exactly.
really well.
They're like, no. We don't want you in here. No, blah. All right. So, which really, it hurt, right? Because again, I felt like somebody is determining my destination, right? So then I thought, well, what's the next best way to get my foot in the door? So I went to the city court and I asked if I could volunteer there. And I met with the local judge, David Ferris, and he sat down with me and he asked me what my story was. And I told him I was flat out honest. Basically what I'm telling you now, I was that honest with him. And he goes, okay, well, I'll let you volunteer here. But if I ever hear of you having any contact with the police, you're done. Your friends aren't coming here to hang out. This is not a place for you to do X, Y, Z. No. If you want to learn, we'll teach you stuff here. And he really laid the smackdown on me, right? Which is what I needed. I'd never had that. And so I volunteered at the city court, just filing things here and there. And I got to know the court staff, which, they're all moms. And, they it's funny because I experienced my first hug, mom hug from these women that work there. They kind of adopted me as like their kid, right? And I just slowly progressed from there. Once I got to know the officers while working in that city court, it was funny because one particular officer, a really good friend of mine now, but when I was a teenager, when I was getting in trouble, he had a lot of extensive contact with me. And he came into court one day for a hearing, and he saw me, and he's like, what is he doing back there, right? And so he's getting one of the clerks is like, are you in trouble? Like, blink once kind of a thing if you need help, right? And he couldn't believe that I was back there. And so, like I said, later on, and I got to know him as we progressed. Now he's a really good friend of mine. He just retired from he transferred over to the feds, and he just retired a few months ago. And I got to go to his retirement and speak at his retirement. But it's funny how, we progressed from that. And so working at the city court, it gave me structure. It gave me contacts with the police department. They knew that, okay, I've changed and I'm proving it, right? And at one point I was, so when I turned 18, they offered me a full-time position working there as a court clerk. And so I did. I took it. I was going to school, college at this time. I'd graduated high school, and I started college at the local community college in administration of justice.
Of course.
Yeah.
What all of us have taken.
Exactly. And I went from there. I applied to Gilbert PD, and but they couldn't hire me because I had too much in my background. So they scheduled a special hearing at AZ Post, right? AZ Post, they determine, who's going to be allowed basically to become police officers. And if you screw up at some point, you got to go before the board and they can yank your certification, right? So I had to go do a special hearing. So not only did I have to test like everybody else and pass the test, once I passed the test and Gilbert said, yeah, we'll hire you, but we've got to get AZ Post approval next. I had to take that extra step and go to AZ Post. And it was just like a courtroom. You go and you meet the prosecutor. I call her prosecutor. Basically, she is going to argue why they shouldn't hire me, right? And I met with her, and I had Judge Ferris come with me.
Now, is this simply for the city or for the state of Arizona not allowing you to be employed as an officer?
It's for the state, yeah. And so I went to AZ Post, and so they have these I think monthly board meetings, if you will, if you want to call it that. I don't know what the official term is, but any officer in the state that gets in trouble, right? That you lie, you get Brady listed or what have you, or you do something really stupid on duty.
Cops
illegal.
never do anything stupid.
Right? I know, exactly. And I learned this, that they do that day, because I was sitting in there and I'm just listening to all the certifications that were getting yanked, right? And they would say, here's what you did, here's what they found you did. We're taking your certification. You can't be a cop anymore in the state of Arizona. And it was like that, and I'm just like, oh my God, like this is some serious stuff. Right. And it's set up like a courtroom. You have all the board members sitting up there. You got your prosecuting table, defense table, not the defense table, but like a podium where you go and you address the board. But the prosecutor table, and I use that term loosely, she's going to argue not to hire me. So Judge Ferris drove me there, and because I'm 21 at this time, and he spoke on my behalf. And I met with the prosecutor who's gonna argue not to put me in there or not to allow me to be hired. And I met with her and I spoke with her. And when it was her turn to speak, it was funny because she said, it's my job to argue not to hire Mr. Zamora. But I met with him before this meeting, and I'll be honest with you, I like him, but I have a job to do. So she did her job, arguing why I shouldn't. And so I went up and I spoke, and I said, hey, everything that she said I did. I was a stupid kid making stupid decisions, and at some point I decided I didn't want this anymore. And I changed the direction in my life. And, but consciously I made all those decisions on my own. But since then, I have done everything I can possibly think of, to make things right. And I didn't say that part yet, but I basically said, I did everything, but this agency, they want to hire me. I want to be a police officer, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then I sat down, and then the board they have to decide whether or not to allow me to go. And the first 3 board members said yes. And then we got to the 4th one, and she said no. She wanted more time thought I needed more time. She wanted me to continue with school to get my degrees. It'll show that I have discipline and commitment. And she said, no. Well, they asked somebody to second that no, and like nobody was saying anything. And then finally, somebody seconded it, no. And Judge Ferris, he's nudging me. He's like, get back up there and say something, right? And so I raised my hand. I'm like, can I approach the podium? They're like, yes, go ahead. So I came up, and I just poured out my heart to them. And I just said, look, I'm not making excuses for what I have done. I did it. I have done everything I can think of, short of joining a monastery, to make today as painless as possible for me. There's no guarantees that this agency is going to hold that position for me, waiting for me to get my degree. And I don't expect them to. This is a very competitive job market, and not everybody can get to this point. I did. And I'm ready to do this, as I explained that to them, the lady who originally said no, she took it back. And she said yes. And then the guy who backed her up immediately goes, yes. Right? And then so they said, okay, you can start the academy, whatever, right? And no joke, everybody that was sitting, because it was like a big courtroom, and you have leadership from all the different agencies in the state are there because they're there for their cases, right? To watching their people who are going to get their certifications yanked or what have you. No joke. When they said, yes, you can go, like everybody like applauded, right? And I'm just like, whoa, wow. It was kind of a shock to me. And so I went up and I shook everybody's hand.
In a weird way, you were in a really unique and awkward situation because everybody else was there fighting to save their career. You're there fighting to ask to be given the opportunity to start your career.
Yeah. And it was funny because one of the board members kind of brought that up. And he said, just because we're allowing you to start the academy, you're just beginning. You haven't even started law enforcement, right? And he really gave it to me, right? But I needed that. I needed to see all of this because I carried all of this with me throughout my career. Integrity is huge. And I got to see that before I was a police officer. And so I stayed and I shook everybody's hand on the board, right? Everybody in the room filed out. And by the time I was finished, I walked out of the room, and I'm not kidding you. Everybody that was in the room stayed. They formed a line, and they just wanted to shake my hand. And I even had one command level person from an agency who I had tested prior to, who denied me as well. She said, hey, if you ever want to come work for this agency, you let me know.
So you had tested at multiple agencies?
Yeah, I tested with one other agency.
Okay.
And I got through the testing, the written, the oral, the physical, everything. But then it came to the background, and I didn't get through the background. And they don't tell you why, but I kind of figured why. But she was from that agency, and she said, hey, if you ever want to come work with us, we'll be more than happy to bring you on board, right? So I thought that was cool. I thought that was really nice. But it was a very moving event for me to see. One, I got to see what happens when you lose your integrity, right? You're done, right? Two, cops care, right? These people actually care. I came from a teenage kid that was always getting in trouble with police, but look at these people. They don't even know me, but look at how much they care. It moved them enough that they were going to wait after the meeting just to shake my hand. And that's a story I don't even share. I don't ever talk about this to anybody. So I'm kind of giving you some information that very few people know about me.
Well, but what it does is it shows a deeper part of you to show not only what you overcame to become a police officer, but then the value that you put on becoming a police officer. Because I could imagine it would have been very easy to go, well, hell, I squared my life away. I'm 18 years old. This is what I want to do. And I'm getting turned away. I'm getting told to basically, nah, you made too many mistakes as a kid. We're not going to give you another opportunity. And that's for me, when I listen to your story, it's that not giving up. One of the questions I had in relation to that, So when this was a hearing that you had to initiate this process, this request for a hearing to the state of Arizona, did you have an advocate from the agency that you were trying to get hired at that was in your corner?
Yeah, I did. One, Judge Ferris, who wasn't from that agency, he was from the city court. He spoke on my behalf, which helped. I also had a couple of officers from the agency that was hiring me. So I strategically planned, when I realized I want to be a police officer, what do I need to do? Well, one, I needed to get my foot in the door somewhere. So I did that. Two, I joined the Explorer program, right? And that's a program, if you're not familiar, I'm sure you are. Yes. Teenagers can come experience what it's like to be police procedures, right? And so I joined the Explorer program for that agency. And even just doing that was they still didn't have that trust in me. I had to really work on building that trust. But the Explorer program really helped me. It helped me with the procedures. How do police think and what do they do? That on top of now, I've got the thought process of somebody who was on the other side, at one point. So that really helped me to get through the academy, even just doing scenarios at the academy, because I was in the Explorer post, and we always used to run scenarios every week, part of the training. That when I went to the academy, scenarios were easy for me because we'd already run a lot of these, in the Explorer program.
So what year did you start being a cop?
1998. And
in your mind, that was going to be your career? You knew that was what you were going to do?
Well, when I was 19 years old, I set 4 goals for myself. I wanted to be a police officer. I wanted to be a detective. I wanted to be a lawyer. And then eventually I wanted to be a judge. So I set those 4 goals at the age of 19. I was very motivated, at that age.
Not what most 19-year-old ex-gang members probably think of doing.
No, right? And again, it's just, I don't know. That was just who I was at that time, right? And, the gang stuff, I don't look at that as a blemish on my record. I look at it as life experience, right? That I carried with me throughout my career. So I set myself up for those 4 goals. And by the age of 22, I accomplished 3 of the goals. I was a police officer. Then because right out of the academy, I went into detectives. They put me undercover in high school. So I got to go back to high school. That was my first assignment.
So you were 21 Jump Street before 21 Jump Street was cool.
Yeah. 21 Jump Street has always been cool since 1987, right? Because I love that show. As a matter of fact, that show, it's funny, kind of embarrassing, but that show, 21 Jump Street, is really what made me want to be a cop, because I wanted to do that. The flipping of the badge. If you watch the opening credits of 21 Jump Street, they like to flick their badge open. To me, that was like the coolest thing. And that's what that was my goal, was to do that at some point undercover. And I did it later on. Right. But, so I became a police officer. I became a detective, and I became a judge. I was a civil traffic judge before I got hired with the police department. Remember, I was working for the city court. And, every year you've got to accrue so many hours of training. Well, my boss, I worked in the civil sanctions department, and we used to create, payment plans for people, right? And my boss wanted to be a judge because everybody in her family was either a lawyer or a judge. And so Judge Ferris said, okay, cool. I'm going to send you to training in Phoenix. It's, you're going to be trained on how to do civil traffic hearings. So you're going to sit on the bench, you're going to wear a robe, you're going to preside over cases. And then my boss's boss said, you know what? I need to get my hours in. I'll attend that class. Plus I want to see what my people are being trained in. And so, Judge Ferris said, well, since the 2 of you guys are going, have Chris go with you so he can get his hours in. I had no intention on being a judge, right? So, or a hearing officer. So I went and I got trained. I got certified in that whole process. They actually put mock hearings together. You sit on the bench and you make decisions and what have you. You explain the process of appeals and all this other stuff. And so the day came. And so what nobody knew was, on my lunch break, I used to go and I used to observe the judges during civil traffic hearings. And I would just sit back there and I would write verbatim what their opening statements, right? Whatever they would say. And I wrote that down and I memorized it, right? And that started the mindset of someday I could do this, right? Well, the day came when my boss, it's her turn. She's going to do her first hearing all afternoon. She's going to take the docket because Judge Ferris can't do it because he's flying out of town. But before he leaves, he wants to observe her doing her first hearing. And he comes up to her. He says, "Okay, you ready? It's going to start in like 5 minutes. I'm going to be in there. I'm going to watch you." And she started crying. And she's very apologetic. "I can't do it. I just can't." She was too nervous. She couldn't do it, right? And Judge is kind of like, "You have to do it. I'm leaving. Like, my luggage is right here. I got to go hop on a plane. You need to go do this." And she's like, "I'm sorry, I just can't do it." And so then so Judge Ferris looks at the court administrator, the big boss who went with us, right? And she's like, "Don't look at me," because I have no desire to do that, right? I'm not interested. And I'm listening to this conversation. I'm like, "I'll do it." And they all kind of looked at me because I'm 21 years old at this time. And you have to be 21 to be able to do this. And so they all looked at me like, "What? I don't think so, right?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "What's the big deal? You just read the law, you interpret the law, listen to both sides, the preponderance of evidence, whoever tips the scale to them wins." And so
not rocket science.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so
we're not conducting brain surgery here.
So they let me do it, right? So now I've got 3 of my bosses now watching me, and I'm doing my first hearing, and I recite verbatim what I learned. And it really made me look like I knew what I was doing, right? And I read the law before I went in. I listened to both sides of the story, who presented evidence, who presented what, made my decision, explained the appeal process to them, and that was it. And afterwards, Judge Ferris came up to me, shakes my hand, he goes, "You're our new hearing officer," right? So I became a judge for the civil traffic hearings after that, and then a few months later, then I got hired with the police department, right? But it was a cool opportunity because it's funny, I was at community college, right? And one of the defendants who came in for like a speeding ticket was actually one of my classmates in school. And she's looking at me like, what is this? So then I had to explain to her, well, now that, I didn't realize that, there might be a conflict of interest because we're here. Do you still want to proceed with this? Because we can reschedule it if you wish. She's like, no, I'm good. We'll just go through with it. Right. But it was funny because every time people would come out, they'd always whisper to the clerks, "That's the youngest judge I've ever seen. How old is he?" Right. It made me proud. It made me like, okay, I did something. 6 years prior, I was homeless, living on the street, and now I'm wearing robes and presiding over civil traffic cases in a court. It just, to me, it was something to be proud of.
Definitely. Going backwards a little bit, when you actually turned your life around and went into the academy, what was your family's response to that? Were they supportive of it? Had you mended any of the bridges with them at that point? Oh
yeah, they're very supportive of that. Not all in my family, like my relatives, were law abiding, but they knew that you could either choose this life where you're going to end up in prison or dead, or this other life where you can be a normal person, right? And being a police officer, they were very supportive of that.
And you ultimately did 23 years.
Yes.
Retired in 2021.
Yes.
And I want to get into your training company that you're doing today, but I want to take a step back. One of the aspects that I want to bring with this podcast is the importance of taking care of yourself, and especially your mental health. And you had a unique experience very early into your career of basically being told, keep it to yourself. Don't talk to anybody.
Yeah. So after I did my undercover stint, I went to patrol, right? And so my first patrol sergeant, I was on my own and got through FTO. I'm on my own. My patrol sergeant one day sat down with me and he said, "Don't ever share your feelings with anybody. Not with a psychiatrist or a counselor, because if you do, you're committing career suicide. You won't be fit for duty." And so when he told me that really stuck with me because I looked up to this person. He's my sergeant, right? And I have a lot of respect for him. He knows best, was my thought, because what experience do I have?
Was there an event that had happened that prompted that conversation, or is this just a generic conversation that he had with you?
Just a generic conversation. It just came up, and there was a lot, for whatever reason at that time in the agency I'm from, there was just so much people that were just disgruntled. They weren't happy. And, for whatever reason, I don't know what it is. I'm brand new. I don't even know any of this stuff, right? But I remember having that conversation with him. And so I carried that philosophy with me for many years.
And that ended up having quite I'll say a damaging impact on you emotionally. But you had several traumatic experiences, including the four deaths of coworkers. For those deaths, were they all one incident together or spread across time, and were they all on-duty incidents?
Yeah, all of them were on duty. One was a year into my career. A buddy of mine, he was killed. He was arresting a guy on a warrant. They got into a fight, and then a semi ran them both over because they were in the street. And I just seen him like a week before. He had his kid his little boy on his shoulder. And, just a super dad, super nice guy. And he ended up getting killed a year into it. And then in 2006, a buddy of mine, he's a motor officer. He was on his way into work. DUI driver went head on with him, and he was killed. And then in 2010, I believe, another friend of mine, he was a lieutenant. He was doing a traffic stop, and he got shot in the face, and he was killed. And then a few months after that, in June of 2010, another friend of mine was killed in the line of duty.
Through all four of those incidents, was there ever anything offered from your agency as far as peer support, mental health, talk to somebody, encouraging you and other members of your agency to go talk to somebody?
Well, in the first one, a year into it, because we were all in the same academy class, so our academy class came together to talk about it. So that helped. With with my buddy Rob, the motor officer, I don't remember anything, any kind of a debrief or anything. It didn't happen in our town. It happened in our neighboring city.
Right.
And then with my buddy Eric, he was a lieutenant, and I was in internal affairs at that time. And when there's an officer involved shooting, IA gets called out. We kind of just shadow and kind of just go out there, kind of get an idea of the scene. So I went out to the scene. There were multiple scenes. It was a huge scene because it was a big shootout on the freeway, leading out of the valley, and then it culminated into a major shootout at the very end. With multiple agencies, and I don't recall personally being involved in any kind of debrief of that. Patrol probably did, but because I was in internal affairs, I don't think the thought was that we needed it, right? Because we weren't there as it happened, right? But still, you're still there on scene, viewing everything, right?
At the end of the day, it's a member of your organization.
Exactly. But I don't remember that. And maybe they did, and I just don't remember that. But I personally didn't participate in anything. And then, with my buddy, he was from another agency. Nothing with our agency. But I never let anybody know at my agency that, I knew him directly. But yeah, that's.
And you say something that's very poignant, and it's going to lead me into my next questions. You said that on that shooting incident, if your agency offered anything, you didn't take advantage of it.
If they offered it, I didn't know about it. Would I have taken advantage of it had I known about it? I don't know. I don't know if I would have at that time.
But where I'm going with that is you actually got to a point where the trauma that you had experienced was starting to impact your life.
Yeah.
And so I've got two questions off of that. First off, looking back in hindsight, what were some of the early signs that you started noticing that maybe you ignored or tried to explain away as just not important?
Well, and those are just those are 4 major incidents, right?
Correct.
And you don't even include all the
just the normal day-to-day work functions,
right? Yeah, the stuff that we see, and we'll see things that the majority of the public will never see. Thankfully for them. But I remember when was it? I responded to a scene where a guy killed his entire family, murdered 5 people, and 4 people, and then he committed suicide right when we were arriving on scene, and one of them was like a 6-month-old baby, and he gunshot to the head for each of them, and at that time I wasn't a dad or anything, right? So I could deal with situations. Yes, it's heartbreaking, and but I was still able to maintain my composure and deal with it. And then I remember, because I was the first one on scene at that, and that weekend I was at a bookstore, because I on my weekends I go to the bookstore kind of just to unwind. I like reading, and just all of a sudden the room just got really small, and I became really claustrophobic. And I'm like, what is that? What's happening? Because it's never happened to me before. But I kind of just brushed it off like it was nothing. Well, it's, now I know that it's signs of some post-traumatic stress that I'm dealing with. I'm feeling claustrophobic now. So then as we progressed, and I just remember, I was in investigations at the time, and I would drive around the block. I'd go to work, and I found myself just driving around the block 4 or 5 times, listening to my music, trying to tuck myself in, just pulling in
to go to work.
Yeah. Every morning. That's what I would do. That was my routine, was I'd drive around the block where the police department was. And, I'd park, I'd walk in, and it just felt so oppressive walking into this building. And I noticed I was always in a constant state of just sweating, like nervousness. The only way I can explain it is, if you've ever gone to a haunted house on Halloween time, they pop up at, shopping centers. That feeling when you go in there, you're not going to get hurt, but the anticipation of when somebody's going to jump out, right? The jump scare. I kind of was always I was in that state all the time, sweating, anxiety. And I just couldn't figure out what was going on. Like, what is happening here? But I'm not going to say anything to anybody, because, I was told, you're given that advice years ago, and I don't want anybody to look at me like I'm weak. And, so that was my existence for a while.
Did it ever become apparent enough to anybody that you worked with, friends or family, that something was wrong and questioned you about it?
No, because I always put on my game face. And the only way I can describe it is, if I had a mask with a happy face on it, I would just put it over my face. And that's what people saw. But they didn't see what was really happening on the inside. And it got to a point where I hit rock bottom. I took time off. I was a homicide detective at this time, and I was a hostage negotiator. I was in school to be a hypnotherapist, life coach. My ex-wife at the time, we just had our son. And so, I'm a dad now. I'm a new father. That's enough stress right there. But then I had all these other responsibilities, being on call when you're a homicide detective, being on call when you're on the SWAT team, school, right? Assignments, all of this. And on top of that, I'm a DT instructor and a fitness instructor. So I would teach on top of all my other responsibilities. And I just put too much on my plate, and I just could not, I hit rock bottom.
Did you realize that you were struggling and you were putting more things on your plate to try to take up that free space in your head?
I don't think so. That's just my nature. I like contributing to the whole, I'm a team player. And so if my agency, if they called me in the middle of the night, hey, we're shorthanded on patrol because a major incident happened. Oh yeah, I'll be right in. Like, it didn't matter. When I was in narcs, I would have informants call me, hey, there's a load coming in from Mexico. It's my weekend. And I'm like, okay, rock on. I'd find a team, and then we'd go and we deal with it. Like, to me, because it was all part of the team, right? And so I put the team first before my own needs. And that's what we as police officers tend to do. You know, we have our priorities of life. We put innocent people first, then we put ourselves, and then we put the criminal, right? And that's how we base our decisions. And if you think about it, we do that even in our personal life. We put everybody else first, our family, you know, our kids. If friends call, hey, I need help with this, you're going to drop everything you do to go help, right? And then we neglect our own personal needs. And so we having that awareness that you're doing that is important. The awareness aspect of it is what really changed for me, because I had to hit rock bottom because I didn't have the awareness. I didn't know what was happening to me. And it was funny because, you know, I was in investigations and we were having, it was somebody's birthday. So, you know, somebody brought in a cake. We're sharing this, you know, we're all around talking, sharing a piece of cake. And then all of a sudden, I remember distinctively, I'm about to eat some cake, and then the room just started getting small again, just out of nowhere. And it felt like I was going to have a panic attack. And it scared me because I'm like, what is happening to me? I don't know what's going on. And I didn't even eat the cake. Like I threw it away. And slowly I made my way out of the office. I didn't want anybody to see me because I didn't know how I was looking. Right.
Your clown face, you weren't sure if it was on.
Yeah. And so I walked out of the office, walked out to my car, and when I drove around, I had the windows rolled down, and I'm kind of freaked out. Like, what is happening to me? I didn't have the self-awareness, right? And shortly thereafter, I took a leave of absence, and I took it 3 months, and I had to use FMLA, use all my sick and vacation. You know, at a certain point, you know, you look at the productivity of an officer. They used to be productive, and all of a sudden they're not productive anymore, right? Instead of looking at it like that officer is lazy, doesn't want to do anything. No, you've got to look deeper. Why is it that at one point this officer was very productive and now they're not being so productive, right? Because, you know, I talk about the FMLA leave. At one time in my career, I had so much vacation built up because I never took time off that if you reach a certain point, you start losing vacation. You got to burn your vacation.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah. And there were times where I was losing vacation, so I had to make myself take time off. But that kind of showed the level of commitment or even overcommitment to this career, right? That showed that maybe I was neglecting my own needs. I need a life outside of police work, right? And so I ended up exhausting all my sick and vacation time. And I was, you know, I went and I saw a psychiatrist because I hit rock bottom. I needed help.
With that, so my first question, you made a great point of, and I think that we need to do better across the board for first responders, is the importance of a life outside the job, which obviously you didn't have. You weren't taking any vacation time. You weren't taking care of yourself. When you finally took that FMLA time, though, how did you explain it to your agency? How did you explain it to your family? Because there's that stigma, like you said, from early on in your career. If I admit that I've hit rock bottom and I need help, I'm going to be perceived as weak. How did you cross that bridge?
You know, when you hit rock bottom, you don't care. Like for me, I didn't care. Like I need help from somewhere. I don't know where, but I need help. So in my FMLA leave, I listed post-traumatic stress. I just did it because I don't know how else to explain it. Now at this point, I was, you know, I'm a crisis intervention team trained, right? So I know about post-traumatic stress at this point now, right? And so, but it's funny because I used to teach officers about the self-awareness you need to know, be aware of when you're doing certain things, but yet I didn't even recognize it in my own self, right? And I explained post-traumatic stress is like this. If you had a smudge on your face, right, on your forehead, how do you know you have that smudge on your forehead? People are going to tell you, right? So typically, those that are close to you are going to tell you, hey, Paul, like your wife might come to you, hey, you know, I notice you're really angry. You know, you've got a short temper. You don't like to go hang out with friends anymore. You like to isolate. We don't talk anymore. You know, that's them telling you.
You're drinking more.
You're drinking more, right?
You know, you're all of a sudden now you're going to the gym 9 days a week.
Yeah, right. Because you got to fill that hole, right? And unfortunately, with police officers is sometimes you do self-destructive behavior, right? If you're married, you might go and start womanizing, right? You might start going, infidelity happens, right? Because you think, if I do this now, it's going to make me feel better. I'll do anything so I don't feel this way, right? So then you go and you cheat on your spouse. But what happens? You create more issues with yourself, right? It's a temporary relief. But guess what? The very next day, you're back at the bottom again, right? And this time, you've created more issues for yourself, right? And that's kind of what happens in what we did. If I was a drinker, I would, and I'm very honest about this. If I was a drinker, I'd be an alcoholic. I guarantee you, because I wanted to just do anything I could to get rid of feeling that way. When you're dealing with emotional stress, emotional pain, I would rather have a broken leg or a broken arm, because then I can reason, oh, here's why I'm experiencing pain, because I broke this bone, right? But when you're dealing with emotional pain, you don't know where it's coming from. Where is it coming from? And that's part of that's what's scary about it, is you can't pinpoint what's happening. And so I hit rock bottom. At that point, I didn't really care.
And how many years into your career is this?
That was 18.
So coming close to the end.
Yeah.
But you also had a period too, was it at that same time where you actually considered resigning? I
did. And part of the reason, there was prior to the 18-year mark, I experienced post-traumatic, what I didn't recognize it at all, right? At the 18-year mark, I was schooled enough that I was recognizing it more. But there was a point where I was so disgruntled with my agency. I expected them to know that I needed help, right? How are they going to know if I don't tell them, right? And I'm putting on my game face. They're not going to know, but I expected them to. And because they didn't do anything for me, I got really disgruntled, and I got so disgusted in the sight of my agency patch, my uniform. Not the badge, because the badge represents more, right? But the agency. And I said, you know what? It's not worth it anymore. I'm just going to quit. Like, I'll find something else to do. That's how bad I was. That's how deep and dark that hole was. And so I typed up my letter of resignation, and I walked it to the chief's office. And, once I hand it to the chief, it's final, right? It's very final. So before I walked in, I started to just process everything and look back on everything that I did. In the story I shared with you earlier, that extra step I had to do, all this hard work I had put in could be all washed away the moment I give this letter of resignation. And it's like, I started thinking about how proud I was when I graduated, how proud I was. And because I got to do some really fun things in law enforcement that a lot of officers don't get the opportunity to do. And I started thinking about it. And then I visualized myself 10 years from now, 15 years from now. If I resign, I'm going to always ask myself, could I have done it? Could I have stuck it out in those tough times? Would I regret resigning? And the answer was, yeah, I would have regretted it, right? I knew enough to know that. So I didn't want to live with a life of regret. So at that point, I reverted back to training and to narcotics training. Narcotics training, that was my niche. I love being a narc. If I could do that, my entire career, I would have, right? And one of the things that I was trained on was during these narc operations, if a bad guy pulls out a weapon on you and you're in a drug house, you can have an entire SWAT team waiting at the front door, but they're not going to be able to get in there fast enough to save you. So you have to take the ownership. You have to take the responsibility for yourself, for your own safety. You must get yourself out of that situation. Don't ever expect anybody to come rescue you. If they do, cool, that's gravy, that's awesome. But you have to fight your way out. That's just how it is. And there were times where I did some deep cover assignments where I didn't even have backup, right? And so that kind of triggered something. Something went off in my head when I realized that. And I decided I'm going to become a detective of emotional stress, right? Because I'm going to use my skills as a detective And now I'm going to start to figure out, why am I feeling this way? What is going on with me? And then how do I fix myself, right?
So by this point, you had identified that it was trauma-related stress that you were experiencing?
Kind of, sort of, at that time, because it took me a few
years. You were at least leaning more towards it.
Yeah. Because again, the initial onset of it, I had no idea what's going on here. Now, I say that consciously, I had no idea. Subconsciously, I knew exactly what was happening, right? And so, but I didn't, at that time, I didn't know how to make my conscious thought communicate with my subconscious thought. And so I really started making daily observations of myself. And, what did I do every morning? I would get up and go to the gym, and then, I'd get up, I'd have certain thoughts in my head, and that were not positive thoughts. They were just negative thoughts, and I'd go to the gym, same time, come home. And then I was just, repeating the same pattern of thought that created a pattern of emotion, that created a pattern of behavior, which ultimately created that pattern of life that I created for myself. And it was all just through negative thinking. And once I figured that out, what I was doing, I thought, okay, how do I break the pattern of thought, number one? Because I need to break the pattern of emotion, but I got to break that pattern of thought. And so one of the things I would do is, even though I go to the gym helps as a stress outlet. And I said, okay, I'm not going to go at, this hour that I always go. I'm going to go at a different hour. And then I added to that, I'm going to go at a different hour, but a different gym, right? Somewhere else, change of scenery. And so once I started focusing on how to break those patterns of thought, because, if we start thinking a certain way, we create those neural pathways in our brain, and that becomes our go-to way of thinking. And if it's negative, if it's not serving you, then why would you continue to think that way every single day? So I didn't know about neural pathways or anything like that.
Right.
But I knew what was happening. How are you going to get any better if you're just repeating the same thing over and over again?
But even with this increased self-awareness, you weren't able to kind of pull yourself out or get out of this enough to where you did ultimately hit rock bottom?
I hit rock bottom. Yeah, the self-awareness, I wish I could say it was like that, right? I thought of it like this, and it took
in the
years.
movies, that's the way it happens.
Right? But the reality is this, no, it took years. It took years of me going through this and recognizing what was happening to me, and so in the process, I created coaching techniques throughout this journey. And again, it took me years to create. And these coaching techniques helped me to get through that process. They help me to regain that sense of balance.
Where did you learn these coaching techniques?
They just came to me. Like I didn't go, I had gone to school, and I became a clinical hypnotherapist. So I got to learn how the subconscious and the conscious work.
What drove you to go to do that?
So at that time, when I had all the responsibilities, where I was a homicide detective, SWAT team, negotiator, and going to school, my agency was hosting a crisis intervention team training, and first responders from the East Valley were coming to our agency, and I was tasked with teaching about suicide awareness. And so in putting my presentation together, I pulled up stats on officers who were killed in the line of duty for the previous 5 years. And nationwide, if I recall correctly, the number of officers that were killed the average came out to like 65, somewhere right around there. So then I pulled up the stats on active duty officers who committed suicide for the same previous 5 years. And the number was like 160 something officers, right? 160 something average. We were getting killed in the line of duty, 65 average. So the realization came to me, bad guys aren't killing us. We're killing ourselves. And that was just such an eye-opening experience to me. So knowing who my audience is, first responders, police officers, and fire department, and EMS, we don't like to take medication because it hinders our performance, right? So I thought about holistic ways that we can alleviate some of that stress that we're dealing with, you know. And so I looked up different modalities, you know, like yoga, and hypnotherapy was one of them. And the more I looked into hypnotherapy, it was all about, you know, the mind and like mindset and, you know, autopilot. And we call it autopilot in law enforcement, but, you know, it's the subconscious and the conscious and allowing the two to work together, right? Because that seems to be where we fail, is we don't get the two to talk to each other. And I just really liked the concepts of hypnosis, using hypnotherapy to help. So I found a local school here in Tempe, and I went to school and I got trained on it. While I was there, I got my certification, and then I figured I'll do the life coaching course as well. I had no desire to become a life coach. I just took it because I figured it would help me to get more information from my clients, right? Ask, you know, really good questions. And, you know, you fast forward to 2022, and now, you know, we've created a law enforcement coaching LLC, and now we coach law enforcement.
Taking a step back, because I want to get into that aspect. You hit rock bottom, you took your FMLA time, you came back from that, did a couple more years in law enforcement. For somebody who is listening to this, who might be realizing that they're at their rock bottom and they need help, and so that's the first big bridge you got to get across. You got to admit that you need help, and you need to reach out to your organization and tell them, hey, I need help. You come back from that. What are you doing different day one after that helped you going forward?
So one of the coaching techniques that I teach is being in the present moment. And we hear that all the time. It's important that you're in the present moment, but how do you do that? It's easier said than done. So we're time travelers, all of us. We travel to the past, and we start thinking about the time of when we were happy, right? And then if you go and you live in the past, you're creating depression, right?
Depression because you can't replicate it when you come back to the current?
Exactly, because you're thinking about, so a good example here. I love narcotics. Narcotics was my thing. But you're only allowed to do so many years, then you got to get cycled out, right? And rightfully so. And I just loved it so much. I identified with it. That was my life. Then I got removed from there. I had to get cycled out, and then I got put in internal affairs at that time. And what I kept thinking about was my time in narcotics. I hated internal affairs. It was so, to me, it was just boring. I hated sitting behind a desk. Even though it's much is needed, absolutely. And I learned so much being an internal affairs detective, but at the time I didn't recognize it. But I kept focusing on my first search warrant. I was a month into this unit, and we hit an indoor grow. And, you know, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. We'd secured the house. Bad guy was transported to the PD, and now we're going to dismantle this grow. But before we were going to dismantle it, we needed to eat because we'd been working since noon that day, and it's now, you know, middle of the night. And so my boss went and he bought us all food from, you know, a drive-through somewhere. And I just remember we were sitting in front of the house. We were sitting in the bed of my truck, you know, and I'm just sitting there, and it's the middle of the night. It's October. The weather's great, and I'm eating a hamburger, you know, drinking soda, and I'm thinking, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. Like, this is freaking awesome. I love this, right? So I kept going back to that memory, wishing it was still back then, right? And so it was making me depressed. Little did I know that what was happening. So sometimes, you know, we live in the past, or we live in the future, right? If you're living in the future, you're creating undue anxiety, right? So you're depression, anxiety, right? We're always jumping back and forth. And where do we not, suddenly, where do we find ourselves? In the present moment. The present moment is where we create happiness. You see, you can't create happiness in the past because that's past, right? You can't create happiness in the future because it's not here yet. It can only be created right now, right? So you and I are talking. You and I'm not thinking about the past. I'm not thinking about the future. I'm focused here, right? And having a great conversation with you. So we have to be aware when we time travel, right? So how does this happen on patrol? I'll share my experience with you. So my weekend, right? I'm clocking out and I'm going to start my weekend. And I'm like, yes, this is going to be awesome. You know, you got all these plans you want to do. The bottom line is you're not going to be at work, right? So I'm like, yeah. So I clock out and it's the best feeling ever walking out of the door. All your office, all your buddies, you know, everybody made it through a shift. Cool. We're all going to go home. It's awesome. But the moment you start your weekend, what happens? The countdown clock begins of when you have to go back to work. 72 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours. You're constantly thinking about that clock. You're jumping into the future, right? Always thinking about it. And then, you know, it's 12 hours until I have to go back to work. You're laying in bed, man, I got 4 hours left and I got to go back to work. What happened to your weekend? It's gone because you were so focused on when you have to go back to work. That's called living in the past. Then you get to work, right? You load up your patrol car. What do you start thinking of? Well, for me, I started thinking about when I was clocking out on that Friday and I was going to start my weekend. I wish it was, and there the thought came in, I wish it was Friday again so I could start my weekend, right? How insane is that? If we repeated that process all the time, I wish it was Friday again, we'd never progress, right? But that's how I was starting my work week, in a depressed state because I wanted it to be Friday again. So then I go to briefing, I hit the streets. What am I thinking about now? Well, now I'm thinking about how many days until my weekend begins. 4 days, right? I'm jumping into the future again. So what am I doing? I'm constantly jumping back and forth and I'm not in the present moment.
Is part of that, though, just human nature as opposed to trauma-related experiences? Because aren't all of us, to a degree, we come to work on Monday and we're like, I've got to go to Friday till I got my weekend.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's just human nature, right? We stress. When we will carry stress with us. Animals out there, you know, a gazelle that gets chased by a lion gets away. You know, is that gazelle going to carry that stress with them forever?
Oh yeah.
What they do is when they're safe, they get away. They shake it out. They just release all of that negativity, and then they go about life again, right? We, instead of shaking it out from us, we just carry it with us.
Right.
We bottle it up, right? Until that bottle gets too full and it overflows, and we have an explosion or an implosion, if you will. And we'll carry this with us. Why am I going to carry all these negative experiences with me for years? How is that going to serve me? You see what I'm saying? And so we have to be aware when we're jumping into the past or into the future. And so for me, I found myself doing that. I started to recognize. And so then I'd say, stop. And the moment I would say that, I actually visualize like a needle right here, like a gauge, right? And I would visualize if I was thinking too much of the past, I would see my needle go this way. And the moment I would see it go this way, I'd say stop, and then the needle will go right back center, meaning I'm now in the present moment. If it started going this way, I knew I was thinking about the future, like paying bills, having to go back to work, stop, and then I would bring it back here. So that helped me. That visualization actually helped me to stay present, because, I found myself at my kid's soccer game. He's 7 years old. He's playing soccer. I love watching my son play soccer, and because he's having fun out there. And I caught myself a few times thinking about, when do I have to go back to work? And so what's happening there? I'm now going into the future. I'm no longer present here with my son, right? And how often do we do that, right? Well, we take our kids to the park to go play or what have you, but our minds aren't at the park with the kids. Our minds are at work, or our minds are somewhere else that's not serving us.
How much do you think or how important is it to identify? So you're sitting at your son's soccer game, you start thinking about, I've got to go back to work in 10 hours, 12 hours. Is it just merely in my mind, what I'm thinking about is I don't want to go to work in 12 hours because I'm losing time with my family, or I'm losing the ability to do what I'm doing right now, as opposed to I don't want to go to work in 10 or 12 hours because when I'm at work, I'm afraid, I'm scared, I'm reliving all of. Are you kind of following with what I'm saying? Is the trauma of worrying about going back to work because of what you've experienced at work, or losing what you're able to do right now? Does that make a difference?
I think it does individually. I can't make a blanket statement that everybody's going through this, but what you're doing, regardless of what the meaning is of why you're thinking about work, you're still thinking about work. You're still thinking about a future event. So what is that creating? Anxiety. Yeah, exactly. So, if you're fearful about, work, about getting killed, about, getting fired, whatever the case might be, get down to it. What is that fear based off of? What created that? Because when my friend Eric was killed on a traffic stop, I heard that there were several patrol officers who were kind of questioning if they wanted to stay, right? They were kind of fearful that could happen to them, right? And, for me, I could live in that constant state of fear, or because I think differently sometimes in terms of, if I'm afraid that I'm going to get shot on a traffic stop, I'm not going to I'm not going to not do traffic stops.
Right.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to work on my tactics. I'm going to work on my shooting, on my drawing technique. I'm going to visualize going up and doing a traffic stop. And if that door cracks open, the moment I recognize that, what do? Well, you move out of the way, right? Draw your weapon, move out of the way. So make yourself more tactical, right? Because, you can live in fear if you want, but, good luck making it to retirement.
And I don't want to bottle it all under fear, because I honestly believe there's not a single one of us who doesn't hit the street, doesn't do our job. If you're doing it without a little bit of fear, those are the ones I'm more concerned about. But what I'm getting at is the importance of identifying what's causing the anxiety. Whatever it is that's causing the apprehension, address that. So like you said, if it's a fear of traffic stops or a shooting, then improve your tactics, as opposed to trying to just merely bottle the anxiety. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And how many officers are out there bottling that anxiety? How many officers fear that traffic stop? And it's like, you've got to empower. This is what I like about coaching is we work with clients to empower them. We don't tell them what to do. We don't give them solutions. We guide them so they can come up with their own solution, right? So they can figure that out, because it's so empowering to them. And by the way, they know what they need to do. When a client comes to us and says, I want to promote, right? I don't know what to do. No, you do know what to do. Your subconscious knows exactly what you need to do. It's just your conscious, which is your ego, needs to talk to your subconscious, right? And it goes with fear as well. Why do I have a fear of this, right? And a good example, I'm a hypnotherapist, and I had a businessman come to me one day, and he said he's been working with a psychiatrist for 2 years. This businessman was getting anxiety, like he would have nervous breakdowns in traffic. If he was on the freeway and it gridlocked, he would just have a panic attack. So much so that he had to pull over, call his wife to come pick him up. He created this imaginary boundary in the valley where if he went outside of this boundary, he would just go into panic mode, right? Which is not good when you're a businessman. And I walked through his
well, business. Especially if you can't conduct your business in that grid pattern.
Exactly, right? And he walked me through his business, and he's got it locked down super tight. I mean, it is legit, a $1 million business, right? And so I asked him, so he came to me one day and he asked if I could help him. One of the first questions I ask any client is, are you working with a psychiatrist or a counselor? Please get there okay, because I don't want to, get in their way, undo anything that they've done. Because psychiatry, counseling, that's a completely different animal. So he said he had been working with a psychiatrist for 2 years, and he didn't feel like he's been making any gains from it. So I asked him, what is the what's the issue? And he told me the panic attacks. He doesn't know what's going on. So I asked him point blank, what do you think it is? What do you think is causing it? And, you know, I always get this, I don't know. And I reframed it and I said, well, if you did know, what would it be? Right. And he was still, you know, kind of, you know, hesitant, but the subconscious knows exactly why this is happening. Right. And that's what I explained to him. Your subconscious knows exactly what's happening. So what I had him do is that night before he went to bed, I told him, I want you just to relax, lay in a nice quiet place. Could be your bed, could be your couch, wherever. And I want you to ask yourself, what is causing this anxiety? And whatever comes to mind, write it down. I don't care if it's a color. I don't care if it's a shape. I don't care if it's a memory, a name, doesn't matter. Write it down. Even if it seems insignificant, write it down. It may not make sense to you at that moment, but it might make sense to you the next day. And so he did. He did that. Next day, he calls me and he's just overly excited. He goes, I figured it out. I go, okay. I mean, what's happening? He goes, well, when I was dating my wife, we were four-wheeling out in the desert, and I went over this embankment, rolled, and, you know, a boulder stopped us. Otherwise we would have continued and probably would have died, but we broke pretty much every bone in our body. And fortunately there were other four-wheelers out there that saw us. They came and they helped us. That moment of when we fell, half a second or a second, whatever you want to call it, he goes, that is what's causing this. Because remember, he's a businessman and he's a very controlling, he's got his ship nice and tight. He didn't have control. At that moment when they were falling and rolling, he didn't have control of his life and the life of somebody that he loves. And because of that, it just resurfaced years later, right? And what caused it to resurface, I don't know. And so I said, okay, now that you know what is causing this, now you go to your psychiatrist and now you talk to him about that, right? And he's been great ever since, right? And I believe he told me, well, it's funny because when I asked him, what is causing this, right? Originally, he goes, well, my psychiatrist said, and I stopped him. I go, no. I don't want to know what your psychiatrist thinks. What do you think? Because that's what's important. And as a hypnotherapist, that is what we focus on, is the subconscious. Let's get to the root of the issue, right? So that's just an example, you know, with hypnotherapy. I didn't even put him under. I just had him do this technique, and it worked for him.
You bring up 2 points. The first one I want to address is family members. So like in this gentleman's story, his loss of control to protect his wife. From your experience, and obviously you're not a psychiatrist, so I just want your opinion. How do we talk to our spouses and our family members about the trauma that we're experiencing without bringing that trauma to them? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And that's my opinion. That right there is part of the reason that we have such a high rate of divorce, because we don't communicate with our significant other when we go home. Our significant other, you walk in the door, your significant other asks you, hey, honey, how was your day? Fine. Good. And so why, now we got to look at it from both viewpoints. You know, your significant other looks at it like, oh, he doesn't want to talk to me anymore. He's isolating himself. He doesn't love me anymore, right? You are looking at it like, I just gave CPR to a dead baby. I don't want to traumatize my wife because I love my wife and I'm going to do everything I can to protect her, right? So you don't want to give any inkling what you went through. So you're going to say it was fine, right? Not realizing that with, you know, throughout the years, it's creating that rift and you guys are drifting apart, right? If she would have known you're just doing that to protect her, how would she have felt at that point, right? So it comes, you know, you when you get, and I tell new officers this, you must sit down with your significant other and let them know, hey, there's going to be some times where I'm going to deal with some stress. I'm going to deal with some really bad things that I don't want to bring home to you. Is it okay if I share some of this stuff with you? If it's not, I'll find somebody else. But that's the key. Find somebody to talk to about it, right? Because there's nothing wrong with, hey, honey, you know, it was a rough day. I had a really bad call. I don't really want to traumatize you, but I'm going to talk to my buddy, about it right here, or if she says, no, I want to hear about it. Okay. Well, she's a grown person. Talk to each other about it. Right. You might not want to go into all the graphic details with her, but
but don't make the decision for them. No. Don't make the decision for your family member to spare them, because they may not want the gory details, but they are interested in you. And your ability to talk about it, obviously, is going to help in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Because now at least it gives them an understanding of what you went through that day. You're not doing it because you're not in love with that person anymore, right? If they know, okay, you had a really bad call, I get it. They're probably going to give you your space. They're probably going to, see what they can do to make you more comfortable while you're there. But if you just go in and say, it was fine, and they know absolutely nothing what's happening, you're going to get them upset. And eventually, like I said, that's when the separation starts to happen. And it happened to me with my ex-wife. I was a homicide detective, and I would never talk to her about any of this stuff. And in order for me to get, so now I'm a new dad, right? Now any investigation dealing with death investigation, dealing with children really, really affected me big time. Which to me, that was so strange because I was able to do that a majority of my career until my son was born. Now, all of a sudden, the landscape, my perspective shifted, right? I'm no longer the same guy I was a few years ago. I'm different now. I've evolved, and I'm a human being. It happens, right?
Kids will change your perspective on life.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, you start to, you're not so like undercover work. It wasn't a big deal for me to go meet, cartel members in the desert, along the border. Now that I have a son and I've got responsibility, I don't think I would do that now, but so what I did was, because it made me so emotional at these scenes, I didn't want to show any emotion, right? Because I got to remain professional, right? And that's what police officers, what we do. We're able to mask our emotions in order to get through a scene, right? Most people won't even look towards that way because of, all the gross stuff that's happening, but we will. We go towards that, right? And we got to put our emotions in check, right? In order to get through that scene. Well, when you're a detective and you're on call, you're going to get called out for all kinds of stuff when you're doing death investigations. It could be suicide. It could be accidental death, homicide. When you're on call, what I found myself doing was, number one, I got emotional at a call, a baby, the death of a baby. And I'm a new dad. I got grieving parents here, young parents, and a baby that's right here that's dead. So what do I do as a human being? I start putting myself in their place with my kid, right? And the dad side of me started to tear up. And I'm like, whoa, can't do that. I'm on duty. I'm in the public eye. I have a job to do, right? But I viewed that as weakness. I started to get emotional. So what I created for myself was this robot persona. No feeling, no emotion, no nothing. So when I go to these scenes, nothing will affect me. And it worked. It worked.
Until you start carrying that away from the scenes.
Bam, right there, you hit it. It was great at the scene, but I carried it with me home, right? And I couldn't figure out how to turn it off, especially when you're on call. If you're on call for 3 days, that phone's going to ring and you're waiting for that phone to ring. So that robot persona is always there because it has to be, because I'm going to get called out. And I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. And I didn't even know I was doing it, that I was becoming cold. And so what happens, me and my wife, we started to drift apart, and now we're divorced, and we have a great relationship now. We respect each other. We co-parent great. Had I recognized that sooner, yeah, absolutely, I could have done something about it. But the damage has been done.
Right.
So the emotional side of it, we got to be really careful about. Yes, we got to get through this tough scene. But what are you doing after the scene? That's what's important. How do you relieve that stress? How do you alleviate that stress, right? Because most people don't do anything. They just, they go, they investigate, here's the thing about investigating these scenes. You are being traumatized multiple times. I recognize this, right? So you get the call out, your boss tells you, hey, we got a death investigation of a kid over here, whatever the circumstances are, explains it to you. Okay. So now you're visualizing it, what's happened up there, right? So then you arrive on scene, you speak to the on-scene commander, and then the first officers on scene, they give you what they saw. Again, you're creating it up here. Then you go and you walk the scene. Now you're looking at everything, and the body is still there. You're looking at all of that, right? Again, you're in taking all this information. You talk to witnesses. They tell you what happened leading up to that. Then they transport the body. You go do an autopsy. Now you're viewing the autopsy, but you're not finished yet, because now you got to type the report up. So you go to your desk, you pull up all the photos of the autopsy of the scene, and now you're typing your report, and you're always looking at different photographs, listening to witness statements. So you're constantly over and over re-traumatizing yourself when you're listening to this stuff. And you may not think anything of it, but it is causing some kind of emotional reaction within you. And you're just, I noticed that when I was doing this stuff. It's like, man, I get to hear about it. I get to see it. I get to view the autopsy, and then I get to go do it all over again when I'm typing my report out, right? And I can even zoom in on injuries and stuff like that. So I didn't realize that I'm repeatedly creating these traumas within me for one case.
Well, and the crazy thing to think about is, for me, and one of the things I've always thought about, the writing it for us. If you think back to when you were a kid in in elementary school, how did your teacher reinforce you to remember something? Write it 500 times. You're not going to forget it. Yeah. I'm not taking anything away from seeing the trauma, but when we actually have to sit there and type that report out and pull all of that detail from our head and put it on paper, in my opinion, all it's doing is just ingraining it and settling it in deep in our brain.
Yeah, and the thing about your mind and your subconscious, it can't differentiate the difference between fantasy and reality. So by you going and walking the scene, we have to figure out what happened. We recreate what happened, the event, right? 20 years from now, if you think about it, how different is it if you were actually there and viewed it firsthand, like the actual crime, versus you replaying it in your head, what happened? It's the same thing, right? You can't distinguish the difference between reality and fantasy, right? So you're still going to experience the physiological occurrences that happen when you're dealing with that kind of stress, right? And so sometimes we don't realize that, but we'll bottle it up, we keep it, and then we go home and we never do anything about it, right? After I had retired, I had a friend of mine who was in sex crimes. And, she sent me a text about she had a really bad case. And one of the things, and so she just needed to vent, right? And I asked her, are you going to talk to somebody about it? I'm a mental health professional. And she didn't even think about it. And I'm like, well, something to think about. There's nothing wrong with going and talking to a psychiatrist about it. One, it's off-site. Two, it's my opinion, in the long run, it's good to vent it out. If you want to cry in there, cry. Nobody's going to know anything that's happening. But whenever you deal with a really, really stressful, significant event like that, talk to somebody about it, and don't be ashamed to just speak about your experience. How did you feel about that? Because I think now, throughout my career, it was don't talk, don't say anything, don't share your experiences. And throughout my career, I experienced it myself. I saw people taking medical retirements for post-traumatic stress. And it's just a sad thing. It's like, could you have gotten through it? You know what I mean? When I was at the height of going through that, I would explain it to people who had never experienced post-traumatic stress. It's like having a monkey on your back, right? You can jump on a plane and go to the most beautiful place, most calm, peaceful place on the planet. But the moment you get off that plane, guess what? That monkey's still on your back. So it doesn't matter where you go, until you deal with what's on you, it's never going to go away. You know, in law enforcement, what I've seen is we're gonna hold off our happiness until we retire, right? I'll be happy when I retire because retirement's going to bring about happiness, right? And so we're willing to put it off. And then we hit retirement and guess what? You're not happy. Why? Because it never had anything to do with retirement. It had to do with you, the individual.
Not having a life outside of work, not having something to look forward to post-retirement.
Exactly, right? Why would you hold off happiness for 20 years? You could have been happy throughout that 20 years. That's the thing. You can be happy being a police officer. It is possible. You don't have to put it off for some date, because I guarantee you reach that date, nothing's going to change, because it doesn't have anything to do with the external. The external is not what makes us happy. It's the internal. It starts with us. Happiness begins here. And we tend to think, well, if I promote, I'll be happy. If I go into a specialty unit, I'll be happy. You know what? If I go to another agency, I'll be happy. And then they get there, and what happens? They still have the same issues. They still have the same problems because they never worked on themselves. It's got nothing to do with going to another department. Every department has their own issues, their own political issues, and what have you. The problem that you've now created is now you've got to start from the bottom up again, right? Now you got to start in graveyard shift if you like day shift, right? You've got to earn your seniority. And guess what? You're still not feeling better. So what I tell officers is focus on you, the individual. Because I know what probably happened is you're focusing on everybody else. You want to make sure everybody else is happy, because that's what we do as police officers. We put everybody else's needs first, and then ours comes second. And it's like, no. Your needs come first, because if you're good, you can take care of your family.
I always use the analogy of when we get onto an airplane, what's the first thing they do in the safety briefing? When the mask falls, whose mask should we put on first? Yours or your kids? Put yours on first, because you aren't any good to anybody else if you can't take care of yourself first.
Exactly. On a traffic stop, if you go and let's just say you pull a car over and you have the SWAT team, they're all riding on the skids of the SWAT truck. They just finished an op and they're driving back to the station, but they see you doing a traffic stop. So they figured out, let's back Paul up. Since we're already here anyway, they're all tacked up. They've got all their gear on. And so you see them, that's a good feeling, right? Like, yeah, something happens, they're here to help me. But as you're walking up to that patrol car, the driver gets out with the gun and points it at you. What do? Do you say, oh, wait, the SWAT team is far more equipped to handle this. I'm going to wait for them to dismount and deal with this. Or are you going to take care of it yourself, right? That's the mentality we need to have when it comes to health and wellness, is we need to take the ownership. We need to work on ourselves first, because you're not going to wait on that traffic stop. You're not going to wait for your backup to get there to deal with it. You're going to deal with it right there because you have to. If you don't, you may not survive that encounter. What's the difference? What's the difference when you're dealing with your mental and emotional wellness? If you're waiting for somebody to come in to save the day for you, that day may never come. You got to take ownership, and you got to take that initiative to figure out what is going on. And that's what it took for me. But I had to hit rock bottom. And it took me years of dealing with this stuff, to create these techniques, but I have them now. We've got our coaching program, our coaching company, and it's years of just going through this that helps. So now, hopefully, officers that are out there don't have to go through what I went through, and it take them years. If I can give them something that helps them right now, today, cool, awesome, and then they can take it. They can take it from there. They can do whatever they want with these techniques.
We've talked about retirement. What prompted you to choose to retire at 23 years?
To get into coaching. So I partnered up with a friend of mine who's a fellow officer. He retired. And, my girlfriend, she's also a hypnotherapist, life coach, Reiki master. She grew up in a law enforcement family. Her dad was a deputy sheriff. And so she understood the law enforcement family aspect of it, the dynamics.
Excuse me for interrupting, did your partner go through similar levels of trauma experience in his career?
Yeah, he did. As a matter of fact, because our paths were very similar. That's why we were good friends, right? And he, he's really big into church and family and all that. He's got a big family, and we're about the same age. But mine, I didn't have a big family, and I really wasn't into the church like he was. So we're slightly different, but we're very similar. But he really brought in the physical fitness aspect of it, right? Whereas myself and Tammy Sharp, I brought in my experiences, right, of just being in there. And Tammy brings in the hypnotherapy side, the coaching side, the Reiki side, and then the family dynamics, because she saw what it did to her dad. And then, on top of my experience, I bring in, because I'm a hypnotherapist, a life coach, and yoga instructor as well. So I bring all those elements into our coaching program. So we got together and we created this coaching platform where we train coaches from all over the nation and various experience levels. There were police chiefs, all the way, and active duty police chiefs, retired police chiefs, command level. We had detectives, patrol officers, and we had some civilians that were psychiatrists. And so we trained them on the coaching principles, specifically for law enforcement.
So you're training them to take that training back to their organizations to benefit their officers within their organization?
Yeah, so we created this platform where, if an agency wanted to contract with us, they would have access to 35 coaches, right? And so, but those coaches who are active duty, you can take it to your agency as well. Like, absolutely share it, because this is what's helping people. So we met some really, really good people, and the level of experience that some of these officers had, I was just like, wow, these people know what they're doing, right? In the law enforcement field. And so we created that, and now we are focusing on getting our message out there, our coaching message, to help our officers get to retirement, but not just get to retirement, enjoy your retirement afterwards. I want to live to be 100 so I can reap the benefits of my pension, right? I want to get every penny out of it. Because what's the average rate when we retire? It's 5 to 7 years?
I was going to say 5 if we're lucky.
Yeah. And we died. And I think part of that is, one, our passion. When we retire, because I had a fear of retiring.
That was going to be one of my follow-up questions. Even
though I had this in place, there's always that fear. Can I exist without being officer so-and-so or detective so-and-so, whatever the case might be. And that's just really big on the ego. And I always told young officers, this is not who you are. You are not officers, so-and-so. 40 hours a week you are.
You're just so-and-so.
Yeah. When you go home, this is who you are, right? Even though I preached that, I taught that, right? And then
Isn't it always easier to tell others?
It is. It really is. And so I had this anxiety. Couldn't I exist without being a police officer? Much like when I was a teenager, right? It was nice to throw out a name, and people back off, I needed them for me. Kind of like now, I needed this. Do I need this to exist? And it was scary. I'm not going to lie. It was a scary moment for me, because that's most of my adult life was in law enforcement. I got hired when I was 21. So the message I want to say is, yes, there is life after retirement, and it's great. I don't regret retiring at all. And I think part of it is because I had a retirement ceremony. Initially, I wasn't going to do a ceremony. I was just like, give me my gun. I'll just, fade away into the darkness. You'll never see me again. And that's really how I felt. And then Tammy was like, no, you need to have a retirement. You put in all this work, and you need that day for you, because we're big on celebrating your moments, right? And to be honest with you, part of me, the reason why I didn't want to do it because I didn't think anybody would show up. That's my ego right there. Because it's like,
I'm sure you're not the only one who's ever thought that.
That's the thing, and so because of that, I was willing to say, no, I don't want a retirement. Fortunately, Tammy talked me into doing the retirement, and it was the best. All of my friends, my family, my coworkers were there. People that I hadn't seen in years came, right? The police officers, when I was a kid, that, I would always have encounters with, they showed up, right? And because we became coworkers when I first got hired, and they retired shortly after. And it was just a great moment. They were sharing funny stories. But what I learned about that experience was it was an opportunity for my family, my son, my ex-wife, she was there, my father-in-law, Tammy's family. They got to see what my life was like at work, because I never brought it home, right? Because I was always trying to protect my family. So the retirement ceremony really wasn't for me. It was for them. It was their opportunity to see why I wasn't there on birthdays, why I wasn't there on holidays, why I was working late night, overnight, all the time, right? They got an opportunity to see it and to hear directly from the people that I worked with, right? Because they made a slideshow and they showed photos from throughout the years. And it was just a great event. So what my recommendation, if you are nearing retirement, you're going to retire, please do the ceremony. Do it for your family. Let them celebrate with you and let them see the you at work. It's so important. And for command level people, it's so important that you attend these ceremonies and honor the officers that you commanded. And that is so, the mayor of the town I'm from, she attended. She's a busy lady, but yet she made time to be there and to say some kind words. And I thought, oh my God, I don't even really know her very well. I met her one time at an event, but it showed the leadership that she took time. And think about that. The best supervisors out there that you ever worked for, what do they all share in common? They care about you. And when somebody cares about you, you'll be loyal and you'll do everything you can to make them look good, right? Because you love them, right? You'll go anywhere, doesn't matter. So so for command level supervisors, I'd say show up to those, especially if you're a chief, assistant chief, all of you show up to those, show respect to those officers because they deserve it.
How long before your retirement did you and your partner put your new company in place? And were you already doing that type of work? Were you already doing the training classes before you retired?
Yeah. I was a year into it. And part of the reason I retired too is because I needed to devote 100% of my time to this. I couldn't, if you're going to get into something, you've got to get into it 100%. Because if you don't, you lessen the likelihood of showing success. So I needed to focus on that. Otherwise, 40 hours a week, minimum 40 hours a week, I'm out of pocket. I can't work on our business, right? So I had to make that decision.
So having something, and I'll use the analogy of quitting law enforcement on Friday, but having that new mission to go to full-time on Monday was a huge benefit to you.
Absolutely. It was. Because you got to understand, for 20 plus years, we created a pattern for ourselves of we need to be someplace at this time, right? Because it's we got to feel productive. And one of the things that I noticed during this whole process, excuse me for a second. Sorry, edit that. One of the things I noticed about this whole process, when we were recruiting coaches, and we just Facebooked it out there, right? And we noticed that retired officers contacted us and they loved the whole concept. They loved the idea, right? And they'd been retired for a few years. And the commonality between all of them was after retirement, they couldn't find something to do. At the beginning of my career, the older veterans would always joke, when I retire, I'm going to become a doorman at Walmart. Why? Because they don't have to think, right? Do you know how many of those retirees are working at Walmart now? None.
That's not a successful retirement plan.
No, because here's the thing. You must have passion and purpose when you retire, right? Law enforcement gives us that passion and purpose. So when you retire, if you don't have anything that's going to give you passion and purpose, you kind of just wander. And that's what we notice with these retired officers and of all levels, command level even. They just couldn't find anything to do. They don't want to take any old job, wherever. It needs to be, they need to have purpose. They need to have passion. So when they heard about coaching, it reignited that passion that they once had. And literally they were wandering for years. Some of them even talked about they went into a depression after retiring, right? That's why it's so important to find what means something to you, right? And so when they heard about coaching, it reignited that passion. They loved the whole idea because it brought them back into the law enforcement world, just in a different capacity. And think about it. These are men and women that found that magic formula of how to get through an entire career and retire, right? Why wouldn't we want to use their experience to help younger officers or officers who are still active duty, right? What worked for these people might work for some of them, especially those who are struggling to get through the career. So that was one of the pleasantries that we noticed, when we recruited some of our officers or some of our coaches. But yeah, having that mission of creating this coaching business, that was big for me, because if I didn't have that, yeah, I think I probably would have fallen into some kind of depression, right? Because I need to have passion and purpose.
For you, even though you had that mission, that new mission, did you ever have a period of regret or, man, I shouldn't have retired?
No, not at all. And, that was one of the fears too, if I would regret it at some point. And no, because I am so focused on our new mission of helping police officers. But not only that, seeing the results that we were having, the officers who use our coaching services, just listening to them and how it helped them. It's like, yeah, I'm on the right path here. I know this is what I was meant to do at this point in my life, because the way I look at it is from the day you were born, like a timeline, day you were born, day you die. For me, law enforcement represents right about here, right? It served its purpose for me. It gave me experience. It gave me credibility. It gave me a pension, right? I met some great people, but it served its purpose. Now I've got all this left in my timeline to do whatever I want to do. And if it's coaching, if it's hypnotherapy, if it's, regular life coaching, yoga, I'm a yoga instructor. I could do any of those, and I got all this timeline to work with.
But tying back into what you said earlier, don't live your life in that I used to be. You talk about, I used to think back to my first search warrant as a narc detective, and that was impacting my current day career. Same thing. You're now retired. Don't live your life as I used to be officer so-and-so.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because that person existed at one time. You're no longer that person. You've actually evolved from that person, right? You haven't gone backwards. You've actually gained the experience of an officer who went through an entire career. If you're one of our coaches, for me, that's how I look at it. I utilize my experiences to help today. Anybody who's watching this, I hope I say something that's going to trigger something that's going to help you today. That's going to help you get through your shift today if you're struggling.
For your company, or I want to take a step back a little bit. We often hear the term life coach. Can you explain exactly what a life coach is?
So a life coach helps you to, if you become stagnant in your life, they help to give you motivation, right? They help you with goal setting as well. And so what we did, they act as kind of like a sounding board as well, right? So if you need a vent, you can vent to a coach. But a life coach does not, they're not going to tell you, you need to do this. You need to do X, Y, Z, and you're going to feel better. No. They will guide you to where you need to go, but ultimately you're doing the work, right? So what we did is, we're life coaches, but we brought in the law enforcement aspect of it. We don't use all the stuff that we learned in life coaching as part of this, because some of it's just not conducive for law enforcement. But we use the principles of it. And so as a law enforcement coach, we work with clients, and it could range anywhere from, career advancement, or, things that are happening in their personal life they want to work on, or they feel stagnant, right? And so, or maybe they want to achieve some goals that they've never had. Maybe somebody wants to lose some weight and they just never could do it. So they get a coach, and we help create an action plan for them. We get down to the root of what is it that you want? What is your ultimate goal here? And through creating that action plan, it creates accountability for you, for you as a client, if you were a client. I'm not going to be calling you every day, hey, did you do this? Hey, did you do that? No. Because the accountability, it's all on you. If you really want this, you're going to do it. We'll meet once a week, and I'm going to ask you how your week was. Did you accomplish your mini goals that ultimately are going to lead to your main goal? And if you didn't, why didn't you? Why didn't you do what you say you would do? So this is the thing with police officers, is when we say we're going to do something, we do it, right? Because it comes down to integrity. This is what I love working with law enforcement. When I have a client, they say they're going to do something, I don't ever have to doubt it. They're going to do it, right? And if they don't do it, usually they have good reason for it. But it's all about that accountability. And sometimes some officers question, and we've been getting this for the past year, they question whether or not they should stay in this profession because of all the negativity they've been seeing on the news. Their significant other is fearful for them, right? And so they begin to question, is this really the right thing for me? And so as a law enforcement coach, we talk it out with them, and we look at the big picture, not just what's happening here, but the bigger picture, right? One of the techniques that we teach about is, we call it the new car theory, right? When you buy a new car, what happens? The moment you drive off the lot with your new car, you start to see that car everywhere, right? It's just, if you bought a black Chevy truck, the moment you hit the road, that's all you're going to focus on. You're going to be like, hey, there's my truck. Hey, there's my truck again. But you never noticed it before. But now all of a sudden you noticed it, right? Why? Because now it means something to you, right? So in law enforcement, it's really important that we figure out that be careful how you start your day. If you start your day with a negative attitude and you say, I hate my job, people are jerks. Well, your subconscious, from the hypno side of me, your subconscious is listening, and your subconscious does not want to make you into a liar. So what does it do? Throughout your shift, it's going to look for everything to make that statement true. I hate my job, people are jerks. So, for example, if you did 10 traffic stops, 9 of those stops, you had great encounters with the public. As a matter of fact, you got compliments from the drivers. They said, officer, thank you for your commitment. I'm going to pay this ticket because out of respect for you. But then you do that 10th traffic stop, and the guy gives you an attitude, calls you every name in the book, says they're going to file a complaint against you. If you start your day saying, I hate my job, people are jerks, what becomes representative of your shift that day? That one traffic. Yeah, that one traffic stop. So then you go home, your significant other asks you, hey, how was your day? People are jerks. I hate my job. I did this traffic stop. This guy gave me total attitude. And you completely forget about those 9 encounters that were positive, right? That's called deletion. We delete information, and we're great at it. We master the art of deletion. And so you got to be careful you don't do that. But you're setting yourself up if that's how you start your day, and you tell yourself, I hate my job, people are jerks, because again, your subconscious does not want to make you into a liar. How do you feel about liars? Are you friends with liars? Do your friends, are they liars? No, we don't. And especially in law enforcement, we don't lie, right? Because if we lie, what happens? We get Brady listed. We get fired. It all comes down to integrity. So if you make a statement like that, I hate my job, people are jerks, your subconscious says it's trying to protect you, and now it's going to look for everything to make that statement true, thinking that it's actually protecting you, but it's not, right? So you got to have that self-awareness, not to focus on that negative. Don't delete all those good people, all those great encounters that we have. So in today's police world, unfortunately, a lot of our officers are focusing on the negative. They turn the news on and defund the police. So that becomes representative of society for some of these officers. And it's like, no. That's not representative of society.
It's an extremely small minority.
Exactly. Right. But you have to have that self-awareness, because there are officers that think that. They think, oh, everybody thinks that way. I don't want to do this job anymore because everybody hates me. Right. Unfortunately, there are some people that think that way. And it's like, no, there's good people out there. And you're doing a great service by putting that badge on, putting that uniform on, and going out there. So that's one of the again, it comes to self-awareness when we work with our clients. We're never going to tell a client if they're questioning quitting, resigning, we're not going to tell them, oh yeah, you need to resign, or you need to stay. No. That's not our job. That's not our position to do that. It's on the individual to decide that. We'll help them. We'll guide them. We'll give them questions, tough questions that they have to answer, Fortunately, we've worked with people that have officers that question whether or not they wanted to stay. After a few coaching sessions, they decided, no, I'm going to stay. Right. So again, and it goes back to what if I would have walked away those many years? Today, I'd probably be asking myself, could I have done it? Right. And don't get me wrong. Some people this is not the career for them, and they want to move on to something else. Okay, cool. If that's truly what you want to do, but don't do it based off of emotion.
Right.
So,
or emotion at the moment.
At the moment, yes. Yeah.
Is being a life coach, is that a specific certification?
Yeah.
And where does somebody go to get certified as a life coach?
It depends. There are a lot of, you can do it online. I went to a school, an accredited school that's very well respected. People actually fly in to Arizona and live here temporarily just to go to the school. It's the Southwest Institute of Healing Arts. They're very, very thorough in the training that they give. And so I can't do stuff online. Like, I need to go and be in a room with somebody. And when I was going through this training to be a hypnotherapist and then a life coach, it opened.
Do those two usually go hand in hand?
Not really.
Okay.
Not necessarily. They're different modalities, but they do complement each other, right? And what I noticed when I was going through it, I describe it to people like I was going through law enforcement with kind of like some blinders on, and then I went to this place and it allowed me to take the blinders off and to realize there's a big world out there. There's like good out there in the world. It's not so black and white, good guys versus bad guys. And that's it. Cause that's kind of how I kind of operated, And so the moment I opened my eyes to the goodness that's out there in the world, my perspective started to shift, and in a good way. But yeah, so, excuse me.
For the most part, for the average person going through a life coaching program, what's the process time?
I believe it took me 2 or 3 months, and you meet twice a week. Like, I think I went on a Tuesday and a Thursday.
This is for your in-person program.
In-person program, yeah. And I forget how many hours it ended up being, but you're there for like 4 hours each night. And you're taught a technique, and then now you've got to go practice that technique on somebody in class. And then you do a practicum at the very end where you bring in, somebody that you're not too familiar with, and you can do a coaching session with them. But you're doing continuous coaching sessions as you go through. So by the end, you know what you're doing, right? So that's important, especially as a trainer. The hands-on is super, super important. And there's all kinds of different, websites that you can go to. The only thing I would caution is, you want to be very thorough, whoever you get trained by. For me, I need the in-person, but maybe somebody doesn't have the time to do the in-person, so they'd rather do the online. But there are many, many different companies out there that are doing it.
And if I'm understanding correctly, the first responder component of your company is just a subset of it. You're not only treating or working with law enforcement agencies, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we work with law enforcement agencies and their families. So, because there's some agencies that will pay to have the family is included in, in part of that. And we understand the family dynamics as well. Like, it's important, your wife, your significant other. So we want to include them, but other people will reach out to us as well that aren't law enforcement, and we work with whoever needs it.
For those agencies, though, that want to work with you and your company, because you've mentioned that you've trained representatives from organizations across the country, is it something where they have to come to you, or will you go to them?
To do the coaching sessions?
To do the you talked about you've trained up other officers who have gone back to their organizations. Did they come to you, or did you go to them for those training sessions?
Oh, no. We created a training online. I'm over here saying I need it in person, but we do it online, right? But we have to do it online because, they're all over the country, right? And so it's a self-paced program that they did. And then I believe it's 2 practicums and then 1 final practicum. And the final, myself and Tammy Sharp, we will monitor it. And it's all done via Zoom, online. And we evaluate you as a coach. And, you're not skating through this. Like, you have to put in the work. If you do your work along the way, you're going to get through the practicum with no problem. If you're just, thinking you're going to skate through it, it'll show on the practicum. And there have been some officers who were in training that didn't do so great on the practicum. And because I'm very big on the accountability side. I want our coaches to show that level of professionalism so they can coach, they can anywhere at any time, right? And so for me, I'm real strict on what I look for. And so we give you guidelines. Here's what we want you to follow to make sure you hit all the important points. But ultimately, when it comes down to the actual coaching side of it, that's all on you. That's how you want to do it, right? And there were times where I, evaluated somebody and I said, I think I didn't see you do X, Y, Z, One situation, one coach commiserated with the client, and that's like a no-no. Like, no, we can't do that. So I recommended a redo. They can do it over again with a different client, right? We're not just going to cut them off right there. We'll give them the opportunity to do it again. And interestingly enough, not one of them redid it, right? But that's very telling to us. Did you really want to become a coach? Were you really committed to this? And, if you weren't, we don't want you as a coach, right? Because it does matter. Integrity matters to us, and the level of professionalism that we bring. So, we're out there. We are spreading our message that coaching helps.
For those that have not made it through your program, and I don't want to call it a deficiency, but what were their hindrances that they should have left at the door when they came in that you see?
Well, one was the guy, the
obviously
coach,
having an interaction.
Yeah, without getting into too much detail, commiserating. The client, because you're going to get clients who have that negative mindset, and maybe they dislike their agency, and they're looking for you to back up what they're saying, right? But you don't know anything about the agency, right? So you can't commiserate with them. You can allow them to vent, let them speak their mind, but then now start to ask them questions to start shifting their perspective. I had one client who was testing for a sergeant position, and he didn't get it, and he said that another applicant got it over him, but that applicant is really good friends with them. They go fishing and they do all this stuff. So he created this story. And instead of me as a coach saying, oh man, that really sucks. And that I hate it when that happens. I'm not doing anything for my client if I do that. So instead I shifted.
If anything, you're reinforcing that negative thinking.
Yes, exactly. So I didn't do that. What I did was I asked him, well, how do you know that he got that position based off of him going fishing? Did somebody officially say that? Well, no. Oh, well, did he say that? Did you talk to him directly and say, no? Did you talk to the command? The person you're talking about, that supervisor, did you talk to him directly and ask him about it? Well, no. right?
More importantly, did you go to command and go, why didn't I get the position?
Exactly, right? So learn from that so that you can be ready for the next opportunity, right? So that's kind of what we do. We don't let you, yes, we'll allow you to vent, but we're not going to commiserate with you. We will reshift it. What did you learn from this experience? What can you take away from this experience that's going to help you next time you test, right? That's what we want to focus on. And like you said, go talk to whoever was on your oral board and ask him, what did you do good? What did they like? What could you improve on? That's where the ego, you got to check your ego at the door. And that's so tough for us sometimes, right? Because we look at us, we think we're RoboCop, right? We're the best. We do everything great. And the reality is, no, we make mistakes. I've made many mistakes, right? It's all about the ego. So go and do that so that you can be prepared next time you test for sergeant.
Well, and you bring up a good point about the ego. It's going around to your command staff, assuming you want to promote, or even if you just want a special assignment. It's real easy to walk in and say, what do I do well? It's another thing to walk in and go, what does a good supervisor do? You're looking for all the positives. It's hard to walk in and go, what don't I do well enough to be a supervisor?
Yeah. Right.
And then be open to honest critique.
Yeah. What are you going to do with that information? Because you can take it and be like, whatever. BS, complete BS. You're not going to learn. You're not going to evolve from that. So use it. Take it to heart. Right? Don't let your ego get in the way, because that's what we do. We always let our ego get in the way, and it hinders our progress. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things we do as a coach. And if you're going to do a practicum with us, we don't want you to do a practicum with, a close friend of yours or a relative. We want somebody that, preferably that you don't know, right? We had one guy say that he was from a small town, and he knew everybody in the town, so he couldn't find a client to do a session on. And I'm just like, okay. So what that's telling me is that this individual probably has issues with communication, with connecting with people.
Because unless the town's 5 people,
yeah,
you probably don't know everybody.
And here's the thing, because we give them the option. You can do a one-on-one session, in the same room, or you can do it via Zoom, because that's what you're going to be ultimately doing, is do it via Zoom. So do you know everybody in the whole United States that you can't do a Zoom call on, right? But that sends red flags to us. Like if you can't take the initiative to find somebody to do a session on, you're probably not going to take the initiative that we are looking for to be a sound coach, right? So, because it was funny, because one of my partners was like, well, should we just find a client for him? I go, no, that's part of this whole process. That's going to show us that he can communicate with people. And that tells me he can't. And he never did. He never did it. So, little things like that can end up being a big issue later on down the road. But that's quality control for us. That's, what I've noticed in the private sector. We are police officers. We take for granted the level of professionalism that we have. And I noticed that in the private sector, that integrity means something to us. If we say we're going to do something, we do it, and we do not lie. And unfortunately, it's not like that in the private sector. And I witnessed that firsthand. Some people would just flat out lie to you just to make a sale, just to make some money. And it's like, no. We're not doing that. I don't care. So I noticed that we are far more professional than a majority of those people who are out there in the private sector. It was mind-boggling to me. I never understood that. I never figured that out. Or I never really looked at it like that. I just thought, we're cops. Somebody that works for $1 billion company, they got to be far more professional than us because, they're running $1 billion. Not the case. That's not the case. This is why police officers, when they retire, companies love to hire police officers, because they can trust them. And they bring a level of professionalism that the average person doesn't really have, and again, the whole telling the truth thing, that is something that we as police officers, that's just normal to us, to always tell the truth, even if it gets you in trouble. It doesn't matter. And working in IA, I saw that, like, if you did something wrong, admit it. If you try to lie about it, you're done.
Well, that's what gets 95% of them. It's not what you did. It's the fact that you didn't own up to it and fall on the sword.
Exactly. Like, just deal with it. It's embarrassing or what have you, but whatever. Like, you'll survive and you'll keep your career intact. But for whatever reason, people tend to lie, and then they get booted, and rightfully so, because, you know, as police officers, integrity means everything to us. And if a fellow officer intentionally lies, guess what? We're no longer going to be friends, because I can't be friends with somebody that doesn't have integrity. That's so important to us. So, you know, part of coaching, we bring that aspect of it as well. Every one of our coaches is vetted, and we hold that level. Everybody's going to be held to the same standards that we hold ourselves to when it comes to integrity. If you can't maintain those standards, we don't want to work with you. And I don't care if you're with a $1 million company, we're not going to work with you if you don't have that same level. Might not be good for business, but you know what? I'm keeping my integrity intact. And I learned that from day one, you know, at the AZ Post, watching those hearings and seeing those officers getting their certifications yanked for a lack of integrity. And throughout my career, just seeing that happen.
For somebody going through your life coaching program, what kind of time frame should they anticipate?
Well, we are revamping the program. The company we initially started with, we separated from them. And so we are now revamping our curriculum. It's fairly the same, but it'll probably be anywhere between 15 to 20 chapters that they're going to be reviewing, and the same process, same thing. We're still going to be utilizing the practicums, and then the final practicum. You're going to be evaluated. We vet everybody that comes in. If you're a police officer, you got to prove to us that you're a police officer. Show us your certification, and we verify that you are if you're active duty. Throughout our process, the way we vet people is we ask you certain questions, and these questions are designed to see, one, if you're of sound mind, right? Because if you're going through some issues that you haven't dealt with, coaching somebody could trigger something in you, and we don't want that, right? So that on top of, do you really want to be a coach, or do you just want this as for your resume, a resume builder later on? You know, these questions kind of bring that out, and not everybody who applies gets approved. In business, the more coaches that you create means the more money that you're going to make, right? And the bigger you appear to be. That's not how we think. We want the best of the best, and just because you apply doesn't mean you're gonna make it. If you're a police chief, just because you're a police chief doesn't mean you're going to skate through it. You're going to do exactly what everybody else has to do, and that's by design. Because if you hold yourself, and even psychiatrists as well, you know, they've got their PhD, you know, whatever they have, you know, all this certifications they have, but they're still going to, if you apply for us, you're still going to do everything that we expect you to do, right? Because the reason we do that is if we have somebody with that level of experience and they say, I don't need to do that. I'm a chief over here, or I'm a psychiatrist. I'm way better than you guys. I don't need to do that. Well, that's where the red flags come in, yeah. Right? I'm not going to fight ego and waste my time with that. So, you know, that's why we have them. Everybody does it. You have to earn your place on our team, and nobody is given instant credibility. I mean, that's what makes the team so strong, so cohesive. And, you know, it's going to take us some time to build it to, you know, where we get hundreds of coaches, but I guarantee you, any one of our coaches is solid, and will be able to help anyone at any point, anywhere. With the coaching aspect of it, I want to make it clear, this is not psychiatry. It's not counseling. Officers come to us because, you know, again, maybe they want help with career development, personal development, goal setting, or they just want to vent. They experience something. We had this one happen. A supervisor on a coaching practicum, right? The coach was connected with this supervisor, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because all of our sessions are confidential. But this sergeant had to make some major decisions the day before, involving a kid, and that was found in the pool floating. And the sergeant was debating whether or not the right decisions were made on their part, right? And there was a lot of self-doubt. And through that coaching session, the coach in training was able to shift the perspective to where you could see it, literally see it in the sergeant's face. The moment that perspective was shifted, the face just lit up. And it was like that person was carrying all this weight just from the shift before her, before she was starting the shift that day. And that helped. And she was just amazed, like, oh my God, I cannot believe that really helped, right? We're not counselors, we're not psychiatrists, but sometimes authors just need a vent. Sometimes they just need to shift that perspective. And what we train our coaches to do is, if it sounds like somebody really needs something deeper than coaching, don't hesitate to bring up the idea of, are you seeing a psychiatrist? Are you seeing a counselor? There's nothing wrong with that. We're not in competition with any of them. We'd love to work, together. And we're talking to a company, a health and wellness company in San Diego, and they deal more with the psychiatry, the counseling aspect of it. So, we're looking to partner up with organizations like that, because if we have a client that we think needs more than just coaching, then we can refer them, to these people who are trained in that area, right? We don't want to step on anybody's toes. We're coaches. We're not psychiatrists. We're not counselors. So, but we can work together.
What's the website if somebody wants to get to your company?
Lawenforcementcoaching.com. It should be live next week.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had to revamp everything over the summer. So it should be live next week, lawenforcementcoaching.com. And if somebody needs to reach me, they can reach me at chris@lawenforcementcoaching.com.
I'll put those both in the show notes.
Yeah, and you got my business card. You can put that up there.
Any last minute or last pieces of advice you'd like to get out to anybody who might be struggling with something or thinking they might need a life coach?
Yeah, it's always good to talk to somebody. And you don't have to talk to a coach. You can just talk to a coworker, right? Allow that venting process to happen. It's okay to talk to each other. And if somebody comes to you and is venting to you, stop what you're doing if you can and listen. Just listen. You don't have to interrupt. You don't have to give advice. All you need to have is that lending ear. Allow them to talk and to vent. And that is such a big thing that we don't do in law enforcement. We don't talk to each other, right? We'll laugh it off. We'll joke it off, quit being a blank, suck it up, right? But here's the deal. If somebody comes to you and starts opening up, it means something. It means they really need it. Think about that, and my old agency, when I was still active, everybody knew I did hypnotherapy and I did coaching, and so it wasn't uncommon. I'd check out at a fire station to do paperwork, and then an officer would roll in because we had GPS, and so they come in, sit in the little office where I sit themselves down, and then just start opening up to me, right? And and these are officers that I'd never even carried a conversation with, but they knew what I did. And so what that told me is, man, they were really hurting, so much so that they're willing to open up to me while they're in uniform on duty, and they don't really even know me, right? That showed how much they needed it. And first time that happened to me, the officer broke out in tears, was crying. I was allowing him to, and that never happened to me before. I've never seen an officer, short of being at a funeral, in uniform cry. And I didn't know what to do when that first happened to me. And, so I just, did I didn't do any hypno, because I don't do ever do hypnotherapy stuff, at work, but coaching techniques, I can do that. And I did some minor coaching without going too deep, because we're at work and we're on duty, right? But it was enough to help this officer feel better. And that became kind of like the norm. People would just come to me. I remember walking through the hall, And, I get a guy stop me. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? Yeah, sure. What's up? And then they would unload on stuff. And I just sit there at my retirement. I was all stressing out about, going to my ceremony. I'm at my locker and I'm putting my Class A uniform on, right? And then a guy, a coworker comes up to me, doesn't know, he's working the next shift, right? So he's got to get dressed for the next shift, but he started talking to me and he was unloading some heavy stuff to me, right? And so I'm standing there like in my undies, but that's what happens with coaching. It can happen anywhere at any time. So out of respect for him, even though I knew I was going to retire, I just stopped what I was doing and I listened and allowed him to just vent. And I did my little coaching that I needed to do. And then he needed that. He needed that to start his shift. And then he walked, he left. And I'm like, oh my God, like I got literally 2 minutes to get to the ceremony, which is, I got to go down the hall and lobby and whatever. So I'm putting my uniform on and I'm in a rush. I'm in a hurry. And I literally, I think I was maybe 1 or 2 minutes late. I walked in and, I kind of felt like people were looking at me like, you arrogant, you're late to your own, whatever, making us wait. And it's like, but they didn't know what I was doing. They didn't know I was just talking to somebody. And that's the power of coaching. Once officers know they have that resource within reach, especially if you have somebody in your own agency, God, that's so powerful. It's just so powerful. These officers, allowing them to vent, allowing them to cry, right? Imagine how much pain they've been holding in for years that they're going to cry in front of you. It's just like me when I went through post-traumatic stress. I didn't care. I wrote it down in the paperwork. Why? Because I didn't care anymore, because I was rock bottom. I needed help. And that's kind of how I look at it with these officers. Coaching I think is a great tool. We are creating that cultural shift that we need in law enforcement. Gone are the days of bottle everything up, suck it up, you'll be fine. No. That doesn't work, right? It's okay to talk to each other, right? It's okay to vent, communicate. With somebody. It doesn't have to be with coach, coworker, significant other, somebody.
I appreciate your time, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.